Chapter 1433 All King Tears. Chapter 1433 All King Tears. Zhang Qing was just about to ascend the mountain. Yet he suddenly stopped in his tracks, his jaws dropping wide open. It was as if he were struck by disbelief. Not only him, but everyone in the surroundings was also stunned, gazing at the cloud of blood that had once been Lu Xiuan, then turning to gaze at Ling Han, who was still casually retracting his fist. They felt a sensation of frightening numbness spreading over their bodies. There was also an indescribable chill rising in their hearts. That was Lu Juentian's younger brother. To put things into perspective, at least several hundred of the cultivators present could insta-kill Lu Xiuan. However, even if Lu Xiuan slapped them across the face, most of them would still choose to play along with him, perhaps even sticking their heads forward to let him slap them more. Meanwhile, those who were more courageous and powerful might dodge his slaps. However, in terms of fighting back, no one would dare to even think about this. This was simply due to one reason: Lu Juntian. Now, however, someone had actually dared to kill his younger brother. The sky was going to collapse. They could imagine just how wild with rage Lu Juntian would become. Under his wrathful fury, it was even possible that he would kill all of the people present. Who told them to stand idly by as his brother was killed? There was bitterness in their minds. Who knew that Ling Han would kill him? Who knew that Ling Han dared to kill him? Moreover, Ling Han was a king tier. Even if they knew he was going to attack, how many of them would be able to stop him? They were done for. Ling Han had poked a hole in the heavens. The surrounding cultivators were all as quiet as a mouse. What were they going to do now? Why you dare? Zhang Qing stammered. He was also stupefied. Even if you're a king tier, openly killing the younger brother of another king tier is an utter provocation. This is creating a life and death feud. Anyhow, where is your courage coming from? Didn't you hear Lu Xiuan say? Lu Juntian is a rank 2 king tier. Rank 2. How many rank 2 king tiers exist in the world? However, Ling Han didn't pay any heed to him. Lu Xiuan had actually dared to speak uncouthly of Empress Luanxing and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden. How could he tolerate this? To say nothing of Lu Xiuan, his reaction would have been the same even if it were Lu Juntian who had uttered those words. He would simply respond with a punch. Let's go. The 6 of them walked away and started to climb the mountain. Holy fuck! How domineering. These people dared to climb the mountain even though they had killed Lu Juentian's younger brother. Just how courageous were they? However, are you certain that you can oppose Lu Juntian? Although he was only at the medium extreme of the heavenly body tier, he was already regarded as the number 1 elite of the Lu clan. Moreover, he had even been praised by a saint before. His battle prowess could only be described as peerless. Zhang Qing was completely flabbergasted. Although he wished that he could kill Ling Han, he couldn't help but feel impressed by his demeanor. This was the courage that a true king tier should possess. He dared to kill, and he dared to face the turmoils that would arise from such an action. His resolve definitely wouldn't be swayed by others. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others ascended the mountain, appearing as relaxed as could be. Holy fuck! Am I seeing things? Am I also seeing things? Gasp! Everyone drew a cold breath. All 6 of them are able to ascend the mountain. Moreover, it appears like they're all ascending it with ease. Holy motherfucker. 6 king tiers. Heavens. They all clasped their heads in astonishment. This was inconceivable. 6 king tiers had actually appeared at once. There were obviously more than 6 king tiers atop the mountain. However, which of them hadn't arrived alone? At most, they had only brought with them a few followers. As such, they had all initially thought that the Rain Emperor and the others were merely Ling Han's followers. Gazing at them now, they realized that the level of followers would have been raised to a completely new level if those 5 people were truly Ling Han's followers. Their incredible power was abundantly clear for all to see. Zhang Qing was also doing his best to climb the mountain, yet he was exerting all of the effort that he could possibly muster. However, the distance between him and Ling Han's group was steadily growing larger and larger. His body was drenched in sweat, yet he couldn't catch up to them no matter what. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others were casually chattering and joking among themselves, appearing as carefree as could be. If they knew that there were still 2 king tiers in Dingping and Jiajust, that they couldn't ascend the mountain, because they hadn't reached the heavenly body tier, yet the expressions on their faces would definitely be even more peculiar. Which galaxy did they come from? It's far too terrifying. It actually produced so many king tiers. Perhaps that young man is also a rank 2 king tier? If that's the case, he naturally doesn't need to fear Lu Juntian. You really have a wild imagination, don't you? Do you think it's that easy to become a rank 2 king tier? There mightn't even be one such king tier among 10 king tiers. Nothing in the world is absolute. Haven't you heard the story? In the past, there was a Shur clan that produced 3 king tiers. Moreover, they were all rank 2 king tiers. I've naturally heard about that. However, can they compare to the Shur clan? At that time, the Shur clan had a saint. Those king tiers all possessed the bloodline of a saint. But if he isn't a rank 2 king tier, how would he dare to ascend the mountain? The people at the foot of the mountain became engaged in a heated debate. Of course, they were even more eager to witness the battle that was about to explode atop the mountain. Once Zhang Qing brought the news of Lu Xiwan's death up, a bloody battle would definitely erupt among the king tiers. This wouldn't be sparring. Instead, it would be a genuine life and death battle. Interesting. There's a hint of pressure from this wind, and it targets one's divine sense. Ling Han said. This is the doing of a saint, the notionless saint said. He was the most qualified to speak about this. I also did something similar in the past, setting up a forbidden region that only king tiers could enter. The others all chuckled indifferently. This saint was very fond of blowing his own trumpet. In the beginning, they had all been startled and astonished by his stories. However, they had all become immune to it now, and they wouldn't pay much heed to his exaggerated stories. As long as one has reached 1 pinnacle level, they'll develop an extremely powerful resistance to this might. If they reach 2, they can almost ignore this might, the Rain Emperor said with a nod. Among them, Empress Luanxing was the least affected by the might of the wind. She had reached 3 pinnacle levels, which was an incredibly rare feat, even among saints. In other words, even if the Star Sand Saint were suppressed to the heavenly body tier, he mightn't necessarily be able to defeat Empress Luanxing. Meanwhile, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was facing a slight struggle. After all, she hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. Rank 1 king tiers could only just manage to climb this mountain with ease. They weren't climbing quickly, and they were also comprehending the Tao of the saint as they advanced. This might wasn't just might alone, but also possessed a wisp of the saint's Tao. Thus, comprehending it would be of some benefit to them. Zhang Qing was climbing the mountain as if his life depended on it, yet he continued to fall further and further behind Ling Han and the others. Eventually, his figure was blocked by a jutting face of the mountain, rendering him invisible. 15 minutes passed, and Ling Han and the others reached the peak of the mountain. A flat platform had been forcefully carved into the top of the mountain, and gazing at the cut marks, it was clear that this platform had been carved numerous years ago. Perhaps it was also the doing of that saint. There were 30 or so people on this peak, though only 4 of them were women. The remaining people were all men. However, regardless of gender, they were all extremely handsome and beautiful youths. Even though some of them had horns, tails, or wings, this didn't prevent them from possessing charm and charisma that was capable of bewitching countless people. This was the demeanor of King Tears. The King Tears were currently discussing Tao, analyzing the transformations of fire element regulations. However, upon sensing the new arrivals, they all turned around to look. Seeing Ling Han and the others, they couldn't help but feel astonished. 6 King Tears had actually arrived at once. Moreover, by the looks of it, they were already very well acquainted with each other. Not only that, but it was also clear that the relationship between them was very good. This was obvious when looking at the distance between them. If they weren't friends, who would feel comfortable allowing someone to stand within 9 meters of them? After all, they were all King Tears. At this moment, the King Tears atop the mountain all developed a sense of hostility toward them. This was because this group of King Tears was far too powerful. If they weren't rank 2 King Tears, it was possible that they could be easily defeated by this group. Friends, I'm Shangguan Heng, the host of this King Tier gathering. Dare I ask for your names? A young man with wings on his back walked over, a warm smile on his face. It was as if he had no feeling of superiority. Who? At this moment, Zhang Qing's figure finally appeared in the distance. He was like an exhausted dog, his mouth wide agape, and puffs of white vapor blowing from it. His face was drenched in sweat, and his body was equally as soaked. Chapter 1434, S Small Galaxy? Chapter 1434, S Small Galaxy. Had the heavens collapsed? Why was Zhang Qing showing such urgency? Everyone here was a King Tier, so their vision was naturally incredibly powerful. Right now, Zhang Qing was truly climbing the mountain as if his life depended on it. It appeared as if he was only sweating, but in reality he was actually forcefully raising his speed and gritting his teeth as he resisted the might of the mountain. The damage that was done to him was invisible and intangible, yet it would be serious enough to severely wound his vitality for several years or even decades to come. His cultivation would barely be able to advance an iota. In fact, it was even possible that his cultivation might fall. Lu Juntian naturally recognized that this was his follower. He couldn't help but feel astonished. What serious matter had occurred? It was actually serious enough to force his follower to such a state. He rushed over to meet Zhang Qing, worry growing in his mind. Ling Han didn't so much as glance at them. He simply introduced himself to the King Tears. The Rain Emperor, Su Ran, and the Notionless Saint all followed suit. Of course, the Notionless Saint didn't refer to himself as a saint anymore. Otherwise, he would definitely be pummeled by everyone present. Impersonating a saint was far too arrogant an action. Meanwhile, Empress Luanxing and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden didn't speak to introduce themselves. Instead, they each retrieved a chair from their spatial spirit tools before sitting down gracefully. Their movements were elegant and intoxicating, and they instantly attracted the gazes of numerous King Tears. "Brotherling, are you all from the same galaxy?" someone asked. If everyone were from the same nation, they would ask which region they had come from. After all, people from the same region would definitely feel closer to each other. Expanding this notion to galaxies, those from the same nation or same planet would naturally feel closer to each other. Further expanding this notion to the Universian, even larger realm, those from the same galaxy would naturally be fellow friends. To King Tears, this was more so a source of reputation and glory. This was because this could represent the cultivation level of their galaxy. Who didn't want to bring glory to their galaxy? This was much like representing a sect in battle. They would naturally feel hostile toward other sections. This was their sense of pride and glory playing up. Ling Han exchanged a glance with the others before replying, "Eastern Light Galaxy." Indeed, Joint Peace Planet belonged to the Eastern Light Galaxy. Since the lower realm had ascended to the Joint Peace Planet, they naturally belonged to Joint Peace Planet, and thus the Eastern Light Galaxy. Eastern Light Galaxy? Blank expressions appeared on the King Tears' faces. They had never heard of the Eastern Light Galaxy before. Which large galaxy was this. It had actually produced 6 king tiers at once. Eastern Light, Eastern Light. I know. A king tier suddenly said with a clap of his hands. There was a look of realization on his face. Which large galaxy is it? The others asked. The king tier who had exclaimed in realization wore a strange expression as he shook his head. What is it? A super-large galaxy. In the immortal realm, those galaxies that had eternal river tier elites were referred to as large galaxies. However, this required the galaxy to have at least 10 eternal river tier elites. Moreover, one of these elites had to be at the consummate level of the eternal river tier. Meanwhile, if a galaxy had a saint, it could be referred to as a super-large galaxy, of course. This didn't require the saint to be a great saint or saint king. It was fine as long as they were a saint. There was no numerical requirement, either. After all, producing a saint was far too difficult. Neither of them, the king tier replied with a shake of his head. The Eastern Light Galaxy is a small galaxy. Small galaxy. The galaxies that couldn't meet the requirement of a large galaxy were all referred to as small galaxies. The king tiers all wore strange expressions. This small galaxy had actually produced 6 king tiers? This was incredible. One had to realize that even large galaxies could only produce a maximum of 2 to 3 king tiers. If they produced 4 to 5, they would definitely be entering a golden age of cultivation. However, a small galaxy, if they prayed day and night, perhaps they would be able to produce 1 king tier. However, the majority of the time, they would fail to produce even a single king tier. Moreover, the king tier paused momentarily as if he were testing the ability of the other king tiers to accept his words. This small galaxy only has a single eternal river tier elite. Not only that, but this elite is only at the low extreme. Pooh! Many of the king tiers spluttered in astonishment. This wasn't because they were uncultured, but because this piece of information was far too difficult to accept. This galaxy barely even had an eternal river tier elite. In reality, there had indeed been no eternal river tier elite in the Eastern Light Galaxy for the past 100 or so years. As such, it could be regarded as a bottom-ranking galaxy even among small galaxies. Yet, it had suddenly produced 6 king tiers? How could the king tiers from the large galaxies accept this? To compare themselves against others was sure to drive them crazy. Is this true? It's impossible, right? Brother, have you remembered things incorrectly? The king tiers all expressed their doubt over this astonishing revelation. It was simply unfathomable. The king tier simply smiled and said, "Why don't we ask Brother Ling and the others? They can easily confirm this for us." Ling Han didn't refute the king tier's information, confirming that the Eastern Light Galaxy indeed only had 1 eternal river tier elite. Moreover, this eternal river tier elite had already passed away. The king tiers all yelped in astonishment. This was a rare occasion where they were losing their composure and cool. Fuck. Humph. However, there was suddenly a menacing humph at this moment, and they all say Lu Juntian striding over, a harrowing killing intent on his face. His eyes were fixed on Ling Han, and he roared, "Ling Han!" Although Zhang Qing didn't know Ling Han's name, Ling Han had already introduced himself just then. As a king tier, concentrating on several different things was naturally an easy task for Lu Juntian. Ling Han picked at his ears and asked, "What's wrong?" "I'm not deaf, you know." "You killed my younger brother." Lu Juntian said gravely. His expression was incredibly dark. His father had passed away early, and he only had this one younger brother. It was evident that he would never get a second younger brother. Thus, regardless of how wanton and profligate Lu Xun was, Lu Juntian still cherished him immensely. As the saying went, an older brother was sometimes like a father. However, his only brother had been killed by Ling Han. Ling Han replied indifferently, appearing completely uncaring. He truly didn't care. You. Lu Juntian was beside himself with rage. This person had killed his younger brother, yet he didn't feel an ounce of guilt or sorrow. Shouldn't I have killed him? Ling Han asked with a smile. I'm sure you're the most familiar with your younger brother's personality. His only use in life is to bring harm and misery unto others. Apart from killing him, what else could I have done? Very well, very well, very well. Lu Juntian repeated this 3 times, a ball of flames materializing above his head with each repetition. These flames then transformed into a fire dragon that arched its back and roared. Roar! A burst of divine sense fluctuated outward, causing the hearts of the king tears to shudder. So powerful! This burst of divine sense possessed a powerful might that caused them to feel unwilling to become enemies with Lu Juntian. Rank 2 king tears were indeed powerful. Then there's nothing more to say. Pay with your life. Lu Juntian said coldly. He stared at Ling Han, ready to attack at any moment. Ling Han simply replied with a smile. He had no time to debate the debauchery of Lu Xuan. He had only been carrying out justice, ridding the world of a sinister person. If Lu Juntian had understood his intentions, he wouldn't have allowed Lu Xuan to become so wanton in the first place. So what more was there to say? They could only resolve this conflict through battle. They're about to do battle. Who do you think is going to win? Lu Juntian, of course. He's a rank 2 king tier, and it's difficult for a galaxy to produce even one such king tier. I admit that the Eastern Light Galaxy, or whatnot, is extremely incredible, being able to produce 6 king tiers at once. However, I'll eat this piece of stone if someone tells me that this small galaxy even managed to produce a rank 2 king tier. Haha, I think the same. The king tiers all shook their heads, none of them confident in Ling Han's ability to win. What a joke! He had come from a small galaxy that didn't even have an Eternal River tier elite. So how could such a galaxy produce a rank 2 king tier? Empress Luanxing suddenly stood up, asking, If my husband wins, are you people willing to eat a stone? Were her grace and elegance qualities that could be hidden by a mere piece of fabric? Of the people who had witnessed her true appearance, which of them didn't treat her as the goddess of their dreams? Now that she was standing, her dress fluttered lightly in the mountain wind, making her appear like a divine, celestial maiden who was about to drift away with the wind. What did it matter that the others were king tears? All of them involuntarily held their breaths, dazzled by her beauty. She hadn't shown her face, yet she was still able to intoxicate the entire crowd of king tears. This was the charm of the Empress. Chapter 1435 Battle of the King Tears. Chapter 1435 Battle of the King Tears. The King Tears were dazzled by her beauty. However, this feeling of elated surprise quickly turned into intense jealousy. This breathtakingly beautiful woman already has a partner. Detestable, absolutely detestable. Celestial Maiden, if Ling Han truly wins, will be sure to eat some stones, someone said loudly. He refused to believe that Ling Han was also a rank 2 king tier. Meanwhile, Lu Juntian's younger brother had been killed by Ling Han, so Lu Juntian would definitely go all out and unleash his deadliest attacks. As such, Ling Han was already as good as dead. That being the case, this masked yet still seductively beautiful woman would immediately become a widow. Although marrying a widow was a little beneath their status as king tears, what did that matter? For this woman, it was worth it. Yeah, we'll eat a stone if he wins, numerous others said while patting their chests, all of them harboring the same thoughts. None of them wanted to appear weak before Empress Luanxing. Empress Luanxing nodded as she remembered all of these people. When the time came, none of them would be able to escape punishment. Not far from them, Lu Juntian was already burning with rage. Who? The 3 fire dragons about his head danced, and slithered about before one of them suddenly dashed out and swooped at Ling Han. Lu Juntian was extremely cautious, and this first attack was only a probing one. Ling Han snapped his fingers in reply. Xiao! A burst of sword qi slashed outward, instantly shredding the fire dragon into pieces. These shredded pieces then transformed into countless sparks that flittered in the air before vanishing. The fire dragon had failed to cause any damage. However, Lu Juntian wasn't worried in the least. If Ling Han couldn't even withstand the strike, he would be a stain on the title of King Tier. What did astonish him, however, was how easily Ling Han dealt with his attack. He was completely unable to determine Ling Han's strength. He raised his right hand and lightly made a pushing motion with his palm. Origin power gathered before forming into another fire dragon. However, compared to the one from before, this fire dragon was at least a dozen times larger. The might that radiated from it was also numerous times more powerful. Ling Han shook his head, again snapping his fingers in reply. Sword qi burst forth, instantly reducing the fire dragon to sparks again. During his 70 or so years on Cloud Apex Planet, his advance in cultivation hadn't been significant. However, his improvement in the Sword Dao had been simply astonishing. With the help of the Reincarnation Tree and Reincarnation Tea, he was able to make huge progress on this path. In terms of Sword Dao alone, he could genuinely be regarded as a grandmaster of the current generation. Still trying to probe me? Ling Han asked with a smile. I came here to see King Tears, not to watch monkeys showing off their tricks. What arrogance! Lu Juntian said with a humph. However, he finally ended his probing attacks, leaping forward and charging at Ling Han. At the same time, he unclasped his right hand, where a long spear rapidly materialized into existence. This wasn't a god tool that he had retrieved from his spatial spirit tool, but rather a weapon that he had formed using his origin power. Frighteningly, this spear was imbued with several divine patterns, making it appear like a supreme elite who was descending from another realm. It exuded a feeling of might and invincibility. Lu Juntian brandished a spear and swept it toward Ling Han. This was a secret technique that he had learned from an ancient site. This spear was profoundly mighty, and it was one of his most powerful attacks. Ling Han didn't dare to be careless. He was also a rank 2 king tier, and their cultivation levels were more so the same. Thus, their power would also be equivalent, of course. This would be different if he were a special case like Ding Ping, whose power could exceed his cultivation level by 2 stars. In any case, he couldn't underestimate a king tier like Lu Juntian. Ling Han finally moved, making a tapping motion with his finger. The lightning sword technique was instantly activated, sending bursts of sword qi into the surroundings, all of them incredibly quick. How arrogant! Lu Juntian shouted in rage. He had only been probing Ling Han before, so it was understandable that Ling Han had responded by snapping his fingers. However, he was already launching one of his most powerful attacks now. Yet Ling Han was still responding by merely making a tapping motion. You diss me for probing you and being unwilling to unleash my trump cards. Yet isn't that exactly what you're doing? However, as the sword qi spread outward, he immediately felt the immense pressure that was radiating from it. The sword qi unleashed by his opponent genuinely appeared no weaker than his origin power spear. Ordinarily, his spear would be invincible whenever it was unleashed. Even if his opponent were more powerful than him, he would still be able to forcefully rip a hole in their defenses and aggressively attack, killing them in a single strike. Thus, although his power could only surpass 6 stars, his battle prowess could definitely surpass more than this, reaching 7 or even 8 stars. This was the strength of rank 2 king tiers. Boom! 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 Ling Han's sword qi continued to exchange blows with Lu Juntian's spear. Both of their attacks were formed from origin power, yet under the manipulation of the 2 powerful king tiers, they appeared incredibly real and tangible. Each time they collided, there would be dazzling flashes of divine patterns, followed by currents of air that seemed powerful enough to suppress all beings between heaven and earth. In fact, these currents of air would even transform into figures of demons. This intense battle caused the other king tiers to all click their tongues in wonder. At the same time, their expressions also became especially serious. Right now, each of them was a competitor fighting for a spot to enter the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Following this, they would ascend the path of becoming a saint. Everyone understood that this was a narrow path that only one person could follow to the end. Only one person would be able to emerge from this competition as king. Now, however, both Ling Han and Lu Juntian were displaying a domineering might that was enough to make them tremble in apprehension. How could they beat such supreme king tiers? Prodigies were divided into levels, and the same went for king tiers. How could rank 1 king tiers defeat rank 2 king tiers? Meanwhile, the faces of some king tiers twitched unnaturally. These were the king tiers who had made a gamble with Empress Luanxing. If Ling Han emerged victorious, they would have to eat the stones on this mountain peak. Although eating a stone wouldn't kill them being king tiers and all, this was still something that they definitely didn't want to do. Firstly, stones would definitely taste disgusting. Secondly, eating stones would definitely feel horrible. Lastly, eating stones would be utterly humiliating, especially for king tiers such as themselves. Lu Juntian, you've definitely got to win. Lu Juntian naturally wanted to win as well. Not only did he want to win, but he even wanted to kill Ling Han. Following a furious roar, raging flames instantly exploded from his body. These flames then transformed into black divine flames. Along with the dazzling spear in his hands, Lu Juntian appeared much like an ancient demon god. Ding, ding, ding. Sword chi swept toward Lu Juntian. However, the divine flames enveloping him transformed into a suit of armor that surprisingly blocked all of the sword chi. Lu Juntian aggressively advanced, and it was as if nothing would be able to stop him. Interesting. Ling Han squinted his eyes. This suit of flaming armor wasn't incredible in its defensive capabilities, but rather devastating in its offensive prowess. It had disintegrated all of the attacks before it, and thus naturally rendered them unthreatening. Fire element cultivation techniques weren't great in terms of defense. However, the person who had created this cultivation technique had raised the offensive power of flames to a pinnacle level, using offense to replace defense. This gave Ling Han an urge to clap his hands and exclaim in wonderment. Not only this, but the suit of fire armor was also extremely capable of wounding the attacker. After all, would one dare to punch it with their bare fists? Ling Han chuckled as he balled his right hand into a fist and directly launched a punch at Lu Juntian. Lu Juntian was astonished. The secret technique he was using was called the Scorching Flame Armor, and it was also a technique that he had obtained from an ancient mystery realm. Its powerful might was evident, and it was a suit of armor that could burn even elites at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. If one were at the high extreme, it was possible that they could even be directly incinerated into ashes. You actually dare to touch this armor? After a moment, as astonishment, Lu Juntian instantly sneered in his mind. His opponent was seeking death. Both of them were king tiers, and it was very likely that Ling Han was also a rank 2 king tier. As such, their battle would have needed to drag on for a long time before a victor could finally be determined. However, who told Ling Han to be rash? He was actually facing his most powerful attack head-on. If this wasn't seeking death, then what was? Since you want death, I'll grant it to you. Lu Juntian didn't dodge, and thus Ling Han's fist held over just like that, directly blasting at his face. At this moment, Lu Juntian felt extremely peeved, even though he could envision Ling Han's fist being ruthlessly incinerated into ashes. Fucking hell, this person is far too despicable. He's aiming right for my face. Doesn't he know the saying to never aim for one's face? Ling Han's fist arrived. Chapter 1436, Resounding Defeat. Chapter 1436, Resounding Defeat. The people present were all king tiers of the current generation, and thus they were naturally very skilled when it came to analyzing the battles of others. When Ling Han's fist struck Lu Juentian's face, all of them squinted, and it was as if time had suddenly slowed down, with everything playing out in slow motion. Of course, this wasn't because time had actually slowed down, but rather because their minds were whirring far too quickly, making it seem as if the entire world around them had slowed down. When Ling Han's fist collided with the suit of flaming armor, a ball of boundless flames immediately surged toward him, yearning to disintegrate his fist. However, how powerful was Ling Han's physique? Moreover, he had even bathed in immortal flames before. As such, these flames were but a tickle on his hand. Pum! Without receiving an iota of damage, Ling Han's fist heavily slammed into Lu Juentian's face. Like rolling waves, countless ripples started to undulate across his face. He was then lifted off his feet and sent flying backward. The scene instantly sped up as the flow of time returned to normal. Pa! Lu Juentian thumped into the ground. Astonishment swept over the mountain peak. It was still too early to conclude who would win, yet one thing had already become apparent. Lu Juentian had suffered a huge loss in this exchange. Ling Han retracted his fist. Among those at the same cultivation level, his freakish physique meant that he could ignore any attacks from his opponents. The indestructible Heaven's Scroll was from the celestial realm, and it was more so one of the most advanced cultivation techniques. As such, wouldn't it be embarrassing if he couldn't even suppress a cultivation technique from the immortal realm? Lu Juentian picked himself up, shock all over his face. He was unable to accept this. His flaming armor had failed to even wound Ling Han's skin. All it had achieved was creating a bit of smoke on Ling Han's fist. This was analogous to a mortal quickly sweeping their hand through a flame completely harmless. How is this possible? My divine flames can burn even elites at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. Lu Juentian took a deep breath. Although he had already unleashed one of his most powerful attacks, it was clear that he had still underestimated Ling Han. His opponent was definitely a rank 2 king tier. No wonder you're acting so arrogant. So, it turns out that you're also a rank 2 king tier. He spat in a baleful voice. His words sent a wave of commotion through the king tiers. Rank 2 king tier. A small galaxy that didn't even have an eternal river tier elite had actually produced a rank 2 king tier. How could they accept this? However, if Ling Han wasn't a rank 2 king tier, how could he have sent Lu Juentian flying? Haha, I'm just SSO, Ling Han replied indifferently. His wife was even more impressive than him. She was a rank 3 king tier. Lu Juentian's expression became even darker. Weren't rank 2 king tiers impressive enough? After all, most saints were only rank 2 king tiers as well. In other words, if they were at the same cultivation level, they could battle toe-to-toe with most saints. However, from Ling Han's reply, rank 2 king tiers were only SOSO. What else did he want? Fine, then let us see which of us is the king among kings. Fighting spirit soared from Lu Juentian as numerous black, divine patterns materialized on his body. They were densely packed, and in the end, they transformed into lengths of chains that were wrapped around his body. It was as if he had transformed into a great demon god. Boom! As if they were experiencing the birth of the universe. The sound of rumbling thunder traveled out from Lu Juentian's body. These were the sounds of Tao. The sound of Tao had actually been released from the body of a heavenly body tier elite. Just how incredible was this? Even though the spectators were all king tiers, they still couldn't help but feel stunned by this sight. No wonder Lu Juntian had received praise from a saint. Indeed, he had already far surpassed the level of ordinary king Tears. In fact, his overwhelming prowess even exerted an intangible pressure on the surrounding king Tears, making these absolute prodigies want to gaze up to him in awe. This powerful pressure also provoked Ling Han, causing him to drop his arrogant demeanor and become serious. An intense, fighting spirit burst from his eyes, his pupil reflecting the images of exploding heavenly bodies. It was as if his pupils were reflecting a scene of destruction and creation. It was a pity that no one took notice of this. Otherwise, they would definitely become even more shocked. Destruction and creation. This was the highest level of Tao. I'll obliterate you with a single punch. Lu Juntian roared. He charged forward, a profoundly domineering aura emanating from his body. Supreme King Tears like them could battle without pause for several years, or even several hundred years. However, it was also possible that they could determine a victor after just 2 or 3 exchanges. This all came down to whether or not they were willing to unleash their most powerful trump cards. If they were, then the battles would naturally be over in a flash. Chains of regulations that had been formed from divine patterns were wrapped all over Lu Juntian's body, making him appear like a demon king. At the same time, however, there were also sounds of doubt emanating from his body like a chant. These juxtaposing powers made for an extremely peculiar scene. However, no one doubted his supreme power at this moment. Boom! The chains around his body shot out, the sounds of doubt also transforming into a golden figure that possessed 3 heads and 6 arms. All of these attacks surged toward Ling Han. This was Lu Juntian's most powerful ultimate technique. Ling Han didn't hold back, either. He was going to battle with his full strength. In the blink of an eye, Lu Juntian's attack had already arrived. Whoa! Ling Han unleashed heaven's might before dashing forward, his hands pushing upward as he also activated Tide of the Ages. Without exception, the chains of regulations and golden figure both started to disintegrate at a speed that was visible to the naked eye. Pung, pung! Ling Han crashed into these attacks. However, how could these deteriorated attacks that were teetering on the edge of implosion wound or stop him? He crashed straight through them, instantly arriving before Lu Juntian. The spectating King Tears were all transfixed with shock. Such a formidable attack had actually failed to affect Ling Han. As Ling Han's opponent, Lu Juntian had more so already gone numb with shock. He hurriedly raised his arms, crossing them before his chest. Origin power surged before him, forming his last line of defense. However, it was a shame that he was in his weakest state after unleashing his ultimate technique. Moreover, Ling Han had already unleashed heaven's might, forcefully suppressing his power by 2 stars. As such, his defense at this moment was laughably brittle and weak. Ling Han launched another punch, again at Lu Juntian's face. Pung! As if it were made from water, Lu Juntian's origin power shield instantly shattered into pieces. Ling Han's fist smashed into his face, sending him flying. However, a dim glow suddenly appeared, and a sigh unexpectedly traveled out from Lu Juntian's body. This sigh carried with it a paramount might, causing all of the King Tears atop the mountain peak to go weak at the knees. This was a suppression on the level of life. It was as like an eternal river tier elite facing a heavenly body tier elite, or a Genesis tier saint facing an eternal river tier elite. Lu Juntian crashed into the ground with a loud thump. Surprisingly, however, only his face was red and swollen. He hadn't been killed. This was inconceivable, not in the least because Ling Han's punch had genuinely been tremendously powerful. In fact, Ling Han had unleashed his full power when throwing that punch. Not to mention that Lu Juntian was only at the medium extreme. His body should have been obliterated even if he were at the peak stage of the pinnacle level. After all, not everyone possessed a physique as freakish as Ling Han's. Once their origin power shield was shattered, their unprotected body would be incredibly weak against attacks. The King Tiers were all astounded. This time, their surprise wasn't born from Ling Han's unfathomable strength. Instead, it was caused by that sigh from Lu Juntian's body. That sigh had caused even their souls to tremble in apprehension. This is the might of a Genesis tier saint. I'm certain, someone exclaimed. It wasn't difficult to reach such a conclusion. Many of the King Tiers were from super-large galaxies, and some were even the disciples or grand disciples of saints. Thus, it was only natural that they could recognize the aura of a saint. I understand. This was something prepared by the Dipankar saint. Indeed, the Dipankara saint had held high hopes for Lu Juntian, so it's not surprising that he left a wisp of his aura inside his body. As expected of a saint, he saved Lu Juntian's life. However, it can only save him once. The King Tiers chattered among themselves, discussing what they had just witnessed. Meanwhile, Ling Han could obviously charge over to deal the killing punch. Or he could summon his divine demon sword to end Lu Juntian's life. However, since the Dipankara saint had already appeared, him killing Lu Juntian would be equivalent to him opposing the Dipankara saint. Right now, he still didn't possess the right to oppose a saint. So be it, I'll spare Lu Juntian's life. I'll pretend that I'm giving face to a saint. Chapter 1437. Rank 3 King Tier. Chapter 1437. Rank 3 King Tier. In the immortal realm, heaven and earth were great. However, saints were the greatest. Few saints would give face to others. However, perhaps even fewer people could give face to saints. Thus, Ling Han quietly bragged to himself in his mind. However, this was all he could do. If he were more powerful, he could have done as he pleased. He could have killed Lu Juntian without giving face to the Dipankara saint or fearing him. Power, power, power. In the end, everything revolves around power. The spectating King Tiers were all speechless with shock. Although Lu Juntian wasn't the highest ranked among them, he was the only rank 2 King Tier present. This meant that he was the most powerful among those at his cultivation level. Yet, before Ling Han, he had almost been defeated in the blink of an eye. With this comparison, it was evident just how terrifying Ling Han was. This King Tier was far too freakish. Lu Juntian crawled up, his expression dejected and traumatized. He had always known that the Dipankara saint had left a wisp of his aura inside his body. This aura would save his life if he ever came across any fatal danger. However, this was both a protection and a test. He had once been brimming with confidence, certain that the wisp of aura would still be with him when he entered the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Now, however, his confidence had been brutally shattered. The wisp of aura had disappeared, and he had undoubtedly disappointed the Dipankara saint. This also signified that he had already died once. The Martial Arts Academy competition in 20 years. I'll return to defeat you. After saying this, Lu Juntian descended the mountain, not glancing back even once. He was a person of great fortune, and he had once obtained an incredible cultivation technique. However, practicing this cultivation technique was full of dangers. In fact, even a King Tier such as him would face the risk of death. Thus, he had never practiced this cultivation technique before, planning to only begin after he entered the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy and had the supervision of the Star Sand Saint. Now, however, he had decided to immediately enter seclusion and cultivate. He would master this cultivation technique in 20 years, thereby giving him the power to wash away today's humiliation. He, Lu Juntian, was a king among kings. Ling Han shook his head. In terms of battle prowess among those at the same cultivation level, Lu Juntian was no more powerful than the Stone Emperor or North Emperor. Meanwhile, Qi Huangji was perhaps even a tad more powerful than him. Being as vast as the universe was, there was absolutely no shortage of prodigies. There was a flash, and Empress Luanxing had already stepped forward. She raised her hand and rapidly pointed at a few people. You. After pointing at all the people, she said, "It's time to eat stones." They genuinely had to eat stone. The king tiers singled out by Empress Luanxing all wore awkward expressions on their faces. They had indeed said that they would eat stones if Ling Han won. However, who would have thought that he would actually win? If they ate a stone before the others, what face would they still have? All of them remained silent and unmoving. Anyhow, there were so many of them. So what could Empress Luanxing do if they resisted? Would she dare to challenge all of them at once? Killing intent started to ooze from Empress Luanxing. She was an incredibly proud individual, and she had also been an empress for 1,000,000 years. Her decree was the decree of heaven, so who dared to oppose her? She wouldn't mind going on a killing spree. A man in green flew over and said, "Ha! This celestial maiden, why don't we make a bet?" There were 3 streaks of white-veined patterns on his forehead. However, these veined patterns didn't affect his appearance, instead making him appear even more profound. He was a beautiful man, an incredibly handsome man. "Why don't we have a sparring match? If you win, I'll force these people to obediently eat dirt," he said with confidence and haughtiness. The 10 or so king tiers who had lost their gamble with Empress Luanxing were all enraged. If they teamed up, who in the heavenly body tier could block them? Yet this person dared to say that he would force them to obediently eat dirt? Where was his courage coming from? "I'm Zhu Yu," the man said. There was adoration in his eyes as he gazed at Empress Luanxing. This was a woman who could capture one's soul without even needing to reveal her true appearance. Thus, he couldn't help but feel love and adoration for her. A smile appeared on his face, and he continued, "If I win, however, why doesn't the celestial maiden show me her true appearance? What do you say?" Empress Luanxing was infuriated upon hearing this. The projection of a large snake slowly materialized behind her, a single horn on its head, even though it was clearly a snake. Like a true dragon, its body was coiled, an astonishing might radiating from its body. "If you lose, you can eat stones alongside them," Empress Luanxing said in a menacing voice. Zhu Yu laughed heartily and replied, "Deal." With a single thought, several heavenly bodies instantly materialized behind his body. Counting carefully, it was clear that there were a whopping 4 heavenly bodies, each of them covered with ancient words that continuously flowed over their surface. However, it was seemingly impossible to identify what these ancient words said. Consummate level of the heavenly body tier. "I reached the pinnacle level in both the mountain river tier and the sun-moon tier," Zhu Yu said proudly. "Now, I've reached the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. Who's powerful enough to oppose me?" His words sent a wave of commotion through the king tiers. What, a 3rd rank 2 king tier has appeared? There were only 30 or so king tiers present. Since when had rank 2 king tiers become so commonplace? However, it was no wonder that Zhu Yu was so haughty. He was a rank 2 king tier on top of being at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. Who at the heavenly body tier could be his opponent? Only rank 3 king tiers would be able to surpass him. However, was this possible? Even among saints, only a rare few individuals had been prodigious enough to become rank 3 king tiers. According to rumors, the Star Sand Saint was one such supreme king tier. Meanwhile, his 9 disciples were all rank 2 king tiers. Thus, those who entered the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy would at least need to be rank 1 king tiers. If one wanted to become the personal disciple of the Star Sand Saint, they would at least need to be a rank 2 king tier. However, the Star Sand Saint was going to pass on his inheritance this time, so the requirement for his disciple would only be higher. Perhaps one would need to be a rank 3 king tier to have any chance. This requirement was incredibly high. There were only 4 major tiers from the mountain river tier to the eternal river tier, yet one would need to have reached the pinnacle level in 3 of these major tiers. Such a requirement was insane enough to have the majority of king tiers shake their heads and sigh. Meanwhile, Zhu Yu couldn't help but feel haughty. Originally, he wasn't one to show off and act arrogantly. However, the appearance of Empress Luanxing had caused him to change his mind. Like a peacock displaying its feathers, he was eager to display his talents to capture the heart of the beauty. How is it? Do you understand the might and power of this brother now? Hurry! Show me your adoring and worshipping gaze. Boom! Empress Luanxing lashed out, the universe seemingly collapsing as her palm pressed down. Zhu Yu's expression changed drastically. The might of this palm was far too terrifying. In fact, even the flow of his blood was stopped, a cold chill shooting through his body. The terror that befell him was as if he were lurking near Hell's gates. He made a symbolic attempt to block. However, the unstoppable power of Empress Luanxing surged over, immediately blasting him backward. He was like a grasshopper trying to stop a carriage, useless and hopelessly overpowered. Pum! His body arced through the air before heavily crashing into the ground with a beautiful pose. This silence instantly fell over the king tiers. The only sound remaining was that of heavy breathing. Zhu Yu is a rank 2 king tier. Moreover, he's also at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier. How was he sent flying by a single slap? This woman, she's at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. What did it matter if one had reached the pinnacle level of the sun-moon tier and mountain river tier? If they came across someone who had reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, their fate could only be described in one word: defeat. This would be the case even if the latter person hadn't reached the pinnacle level in the previous 2 tiers. Of course, this was unless both of them had reached the eternal river tier. At that stage, the person who had reached 2 pinnacle levels would definitely be more powerful than the person who had only reached one. The higher one's cultivation, the more difficult it would be to reach the pinnacle level. As such, most king tiers would only reach the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier. It was also because of this that rank 2 king tiers were incredibly rare, and rank 3 king tiers. Well, throughout the hundreds of neighboring galaxies, only the Star Sand Saint had successfully become a rank 3 king tier. Gasp! She had even reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, so it was extremely likely that this woman had also reached the pinnacle level of the mountain river tier and the pinnacle level of the sun-moon tier. Rank 3 king tier. Chapter 1438, Eating Stones. Chapter 1438, Eating Stones. Rank 3 king tier. The king tiers were all numb with shock. Right now, all they could do was breathe heavily as they watched on. Although this was only speculation, it was speculation that had at least an 80% chance of being true, perhaps even 90%. Was Zhu Yu powerful? Definitely. However, even someone as powerful as him had been defeated in an instant. This further highlighted just how terrifying this empress was. Her might was so formidable that she had crushed him with a single strike. It's your choice. You can either eat stones by yourself, or I can force you to eat stones, the empress said calmly. They had actually dared to question Ling Han's ability. In her eyes, this was an abhorrent crime. The king tiers who had lost their gamble against her couldn't help but grimace. How humiliating. They actually had to eat stones before everyone else. Moreover, this was the Purple Wind Mountain. Each stone, each tree, and each blade of grass was affected by the aura of a saint. Eating the stones on this mountain would definitely affect their digestion. However, did they dare to oppose her? Even Zhu Yu had been defeated in a single exchange. Moreover, those at the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier were just as powerful as elites at the low extreme of the eternal river tier. How could they challenge such an elite? The other king tiers were all chuckling in amusement as they watched on. They were naturally delighted to see these people being humiliated. In fact, it would be even better if they left with their tails between their legs. That way, the competition to enter the Star San Martial Arts Academy in 20 years, time would become slightly less intense. After all, they were all king tiers, so who dared to say that they were absolutely confident? Of course, this was disregarding rank 2 king tiers. There were far too few of these king tiers, and the Star San Martial Arts Academy was furthermore recruiting 900 disciples this time. If there were more rank 2 king tiers than this, it would be far too unbelievable. "I'm not going to eat it," someone shouted defiantly. "My master's master is the venerable Tiger Cloud, and he's an elite at the consummate level of the Eternal River tier." Since he couldn't defeat Empress Luan Xing, he could only use his background to threaten her. "I'm not eating stones either. My master's lineage is that of the complete origin saint." This person possessed an even more impressive background. Empress Luan Xing humphed coldly before suddenly lashing out. "Pa, pa, pa!" The limbs of the defiant king tiers were instantly shattered. These king tiers collapsed to the ground, groaning in agony. Empress Luan Xing remained silent as she turned her gaze toward the remaining king tiers. This was a silent threat. If they refused to eat stones, this would be their fate. What Eternal River tier elite? What Genesis tier saint? She couldn't care less about these king tiers' backgrounds. The king tiers grimaced again. This woman was not only powerful, but she was also extremely audacious. She didn't give a **T, regardless of whether their masters were at the Eternal River tier or Genesis tier. She was intent on forcing them to eat stones. Several people stepped forward, each picking up a stone and obediently starting to eat it. The crunch of their chewing was loud and embarrassing. What am I seeing? The heavenly body tier elites and winged humans in the sky all rubbed their eyes in shock. They could barely believe what they were witnessing. Heavens! The people at the foot of the Purple Wind Mountain were extremely curious, asking, "Senior Chin, what's going on?" "Uncle Lou, what have you seen?" "Great-grandpa, hurry up and tell us." However, it was as if the cultivators in the sky had all become stupid. After a long moment, an older generation heavenly body tier elite finally composed himself, saying, "A few of the king tiers lost a bet and they're now eating stones." His voice was shaking, and it was clear that he still hadn't fully recovered from his shock. "Pooh!" Many of them instantly spluttered in astonishment. Eating stones? Those were king tiers. Their face and reputation were even more important than their lives. How could they carry through with such a humiliating act? However, reality proved that between their face and their life, it was still their life that was far more important. What were they betting on? Whom did they bet against? The cultivators at the foot of the mountain were all captivated by what was going on. After learning that Ling Han had defeated Lu Juntian and that Empress Luan Xing had defeated a rank 2 king tier at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier with a single strike, all of them were dumbfounded with shock and fright. Initially, none of them had been confident in Ling Han's and his companion's abilities. However, who would have thought that they were actually this domineering and powerful? Not only were they all king tiers, but there were even rank 2 and rank 3 king tiers among them. Heavens, I'm about to go crazy. I've heard that they all came from the Eastern Light Galaxy, which is only a small galaxy. This is a small galaxy that doesn't even have an Eternal River tier elite. Who can tell me, how did such a galaxy produce a rank 3 king tier? The cultivators all clasped their heads as they exclaimed in shock. This was far too incredible. No matter how they thought about it, it was still as if they were dreaming. Atop the mountain peak, Zhu Yu slowly crawled to his feet, planning to scurry away and flee while no one was looking. He couldn't bring himself to eat dirt and whatnot. With a flash, Empress Luan Xing had already arrived before him, blocking his path of escape. Her flawless figure was radiating with a powerful aura that was capable of suppressing even the heavens. Zhu Yu's expression instantly changed, and he said, "Celestial Maiden, you should always choose to forgive when possible. I'm a rank 2 king tier, and even if I don't become a rank 3 king tier, my battle prowess will be no weaker than yours when I advance to the Eternal River tier. It's best that you don't force." "Pa!" Empress Luan Xing made a slapping motion, and Zhu Yu was instantly sent flying. A row of his teeth was forcefully knocked out. The Empress turned around, saying, "Heavenly Phoenix, bring me a rod and string." "Yes, sister." The Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden hurriedly did as the Empress asked. The two women then trussed Zhu Yu up tightly, sealing his cultivation while they were at it. How could Zhu Yu break free and escape from them? He was hung high up on a rod, swaying helplessly whenever the mountain wind breezed over. Great! His reputation and face had truly been ruined now. The king tiers who were eating stones glanced over, cold sweat instantly pouring down their foreheads. They started to eat their stones with even more energy and vigor. It was as if these weren't stones that had been tempered by a saint, but rather an immensely appetizing meal. Crack, crack, crack. The sound of their chewing was as crunchy as could be. The Rain Emperor laughed heartily as he stepped forward, asking, "Who wants to spar with me?" He summoned his 4 heavenly bodies, revealing his cultivation to everyone present. This was also to prevent those at the high extreme or even medium extreme from challenging him. After all, sparring against them would be far too boring and pointless. "I'll spar against you," a young man in purple said as he walked over. There was a layer of scales on his skin, and it was as if they had been forged from fine iron. They exuded an extremely chilly aura. Ling Han and his companions were far too domineering. They had first defeated Lu Juntian, then defeated Zhu Yu. This caused a feeling of hostility to rise in the minds of the remaining king tiers. There was a ball of fire in their chests, and they wanted to achieve victory against one of Ling Han's companions, even if they couldn't defeat Ling Han or Empress Luan Xing. This challenger was at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, and the 4 heavenly bodies that he released were all of the same size. It was clear that he had already reached the peak stage of the consummate level. "Come!" the Rain Emperor roared as he charged over and immediately threw a punch. His path was one of dominance, and he would courageously attack regardless of who his opponent was. In fact, he would dare to attack even if his opponent were a saint. Boom! 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 The young man wasn't a pushover. Although he was only a rank 1 king tier, the Rain Emperor hadn't reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier either. Thus, the gap between them was only very minimal. Moreover, the scales on the young man possessed incredible defensive abilities, being able to dissipate much of the power behind the Rain Emperor's attacks. Thus, even though his power was 1 to 2 times weaker than the Rain Emperor's, he could rely on his powerful defense to mitigate this disadvantage. This was the advantage of his bloodline. However, this was also the limit of what his bloodline could achieve. Apart from the bloodlines of ancient supreme prodigies, how powerful and mighty could these other bloodlines be? The Rain Emperor ruthlessly defeated the young man after throwing just 37 punches. The ground was littered with the young man's scales. Moreover, the young man didn't have any excuse for his loss. He had lost comprehensively. It can't be right. Is this another rank 2 king tier? Good heavens! This many high-ranking king tiers were produced by a super small galaxy? This doesn't make any sense. Don't tell me that their other companions are also rank 2 king tiers. Why do I feel like they all are? The remaining king tiers were unable and unwilling to accept this reality, since when had rank 2 king tiers become so commonplace? During the past recruitment cycles of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy, there would only be 20 or so king tiers at this level. Now, however, there were several such king tiers on this mountain peak alone. Moreover, there was even a rank 3 king tier among them. Chapter 1439 Gudawi. Chapter 1439 Gudawi. The tea-tasting and Tao discussion gathering between the king tiers eventually became a platform for Ling Han and his companions to flex their strength. Su Ran and the notionless saint also stepped forward one after another, easily defeating any king tier who challenged them. They were also rank 2 king tiers. Only when the heavenly phoenix divine maiden stepped forward did the king tiers feel that normality had returned. This was because there was finally a rank 1 king tier among Ling Han's group. Among the 6 king tiers, a whopping 4 of them were rank 2 king tiers, while one of them was more so a rank 3 king tier. This was truly a formidable force. It's extremely likely that they'll all qualify to enter the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. At least, it won't be a problem for those 5 of them. That's right. If even rank 2 king tiers don't have the right to enter, then the rest of us won't even stand a chance. Everyone shook their heads in disbelief. However, would king tiers lose their confidence so easily? They immediately steeled themselves and rediscovered their confidence. After reaching the Eternal River tier, they would have been dragged back to almost the same starting line. There wouldn't be a huge gap between rank 1 and rank 2 king tiers. In other words, they still had a chance. Moreover, if they could reach the pinnacle level of the Heavenly Body tier or Eternal River tier, that would definitely be even more impressive. Of course, the difficulty of doing so would naturally be manyfold that of reaching the pinnacle level of the previous major tiers. In reality, only very few people could reach the pinnacle level of the Heavenly Body tier after failing to reach the pinnacle level of the Sun Moon tier. Similarly, few people could reach the pinnacle level of the Eternal River tier after failing to reach the pinnacle level of the Heavenly Body tier. This was more so the case with Genesis tier saints. If someone genuinely managed to reach the pinnacle level of the Genesis tier, they would definitely be the ruler among saints. They would be a supreme king tier who could defeat anyone in their way. However, rank 5 king tiers had only ever existed in the legends. They had never appeared in real life. Anyhow, it wasn't long before the gathering of king tiers came to an end. Most of the king tiers also exchanged their current addresses at the conclusion of the gathering. They weren't planning on adventuring to faraway places during this time, and they would instead quietly wait for the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy to begin recruitment. In any case, there were only 20 or so years until this time arrived. To them, 20 years would pass as quickly as the blink of an eye. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others had only arrived this early because they were worried that the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy might begin its recruitment earlier. After all, the planned timeline of 100 years had only been conceptual, not precise. They settled down in a nearby city, refining pills and cultivating as time quietly crept by. More and more king tiers arrived on Woodfigure Planet, some of them wanton and seeking battles everywhere. The Rain Emperor was one of them. Among these king tiers, some of them performed impressively and thus became renowned throughout the area. For example, the Rain Emperor had received the title of Fists Demon. This was because he only used his fists during battles, relying on his domineering battle style to obliterate his opponents. He was much like a frenzied demon. However, what caught Ling Han's attention was the fact that Gu Dawi had also arrived. He had become a brilliant rising star, attracting the reverence and following of countless people. According to rumors, even king tiers had submitted to him, willingly becoming his followers. Just this fact alone was enough to send shock waves through Woodfigure Planet. Those were king tiers. They were high and mighty beings who could look down on everyone else. Yet, they had actually become someone else's follower? This was evidence of Gu Dawi's charisma and profound power. Otherwise, how would king tiers have submitted to him and become his followers? No one knew what rank king tier Gu Dawi was. However, right now he was the most dazzling rising star on this planet. His might and renown were far above those of anyone else. Meanwhile, Empress Luanxing had also become famous. This was because she had defeated Juyu in a single strike. Some king tiers had come over to challenge her upon hearing this, yet they had all been suppressed by her in a single strike, and thus she was given the title of King Tier Assassin. There were 2 layers of meaning behind this title. Firstly, this represented her tremendous power. Secondly, this described her breathtaking charm. The king tiers who witnessed her beauty would all be enchanted by her, willing to become her loyal subjects. If there were someone who could rival Gu Daoi's popularity, that would be Empress Luanxing. Right now, everyone was eagerly anticipating a battle between these 2 renowned king tiers. Gu Daoi, huh? Ling Han recounted the events of the Medicine King's cave to Empress Luanxing. A serious expression appeared on Empress Luanxing's face as she heard the story of Gu Daoi. He had originally been an elite of the celestial realm. Just this fact alone would be enough to stun everyone in the immortal realm. After living 9 lives and burying his 9 previous bodies, he had finally used these to nurture the divine fetus of his 10th life. Even in the celestial realm, such a divine fetus would be tremendously rare and top-notch. Moreover, those with a divine fetus would also possess heaven-defying talent. Are you certain that he buried his 9 previous bodies and nurtured a divine fetus for his 10th life? Empress Luanxing asked, appearing slightly emotional. In fact, even her slender body was trembling. I'm certain. Ling Han answered with a nod. What's wrong? He's definitely practicing the 9 Deaths Heaven art. Empress Luanxing said with certainty. How do you know? Empress Luanxing paused for a moment as if recalling something. After a long while, she replied, the ancient ancestor of the 9 Snake tribe obtained a cultivation technique in an ancient site. It was because of this cultivation technique that they were able to become renowned throughout the celestial realm. This cultivation technique was the 9 Deaths Heaven art. What? Ling Han was astonished. Then how come Gu Daoi is also practicing the 9 Deaths Heaven art? Is he also a member of the 9 Snake tribe? Empress Luanxing shook her head and said, Impossible! At that time, every single member of the 9 Snake tribe left the celestial realm, not leaving a single tribe member behind. Gu Daoi definitely inherited the 9 Deaths Heaven art after entering the ancestral grounds of the 9 Snake tribe. She paused for a moment before continuing. Perhaps he's grasped even more of the 9 Deaths Heaven art than I have. After all, I only inherited this cultivation technique from my bloodline. However, my bloodline has equally limited my mastery and understanding of this cultivation technique. Moreover, the ancient ancestor of the 9 Snake tribe didn't attain great accomplishment in the 9 Deaths Heaven art either. Thus, even if my bloodline awakens, I still won't reach the pinnacle level of the 9 Deaths Heaven art. So, I definitely have to return to the ancestral grounds of the 9 Snake tribe to personally read the scripts of the 9 Deaths Heaven art. Ling Han was astonished, saying, In other words, the bloodline of the 9 Snake tribe isn't inherent, but rather a result of practicing the 9 Deaths Heaven art. Empress Luanxing smiled warmly, replying, No bloodline is inherent. It's only because the ancestor of a tribe has practiced or created a powerful cultivation technique and fused it into their bloodline that they're able to pass it down generation after generation. However, the larger the generational gap, the thinner this bloodline becomes. Ling Han pondered for a moment before asking, If you obtain the complete 9 Deaths Heaven art, will your cultivation level climb more rapidly? Certainly, Empress Luanxing answered with a nod. Burying 9 previous bodies to birth the 10th divine fetus is the highest-ranking secret technique of the 9 Deaths Heaven art. I only know of the existence of this technique, but I don't actually know how to practice it. If I can absorb the power of the divine fetus, my 9 snake body will definitely evolve into its most perfect form. Ling Han immediately clapped his hands, saying, Then we definitely have to capture Gu Dawi and force him to hand over the 9 deaths, heaven art, and divine fetus. You seem even more enthusiastic than me, Empress Luanxing asked with a smile. Ling Han's expression became serious, and he said, Of course. I want you to reach the Genesis tier as soon as possible. The Empress faltered for a moment before coming to her senses. Ling Han was eager to bet her. Yet he had actually said that with such seriousness. However, she liked that. Since he couldn't make love with the Empress, he would conquer the heavenly phoenix, divine maiden first. They were all his wives anyway, so he couldn't treat one better than the other. Moreover, this violent woman had even experienced widowhood for him for 10,000 years. It was probably time for him to reward her. Ling Han entered the Black Tower after refining some pills. Right now, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was under huge pressure. Thus, she would cultivate under the reincarnation tree whenever she had time. This was so that she could catch up to everyone else's footsteps. Otherwise, it was possible that she might even fail to enter the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. Wife, I've come to deliver some alchemical pills for you. Ling Han found an excuse to talk to her. Otherwise, if this violent woman became stubborn, she would ignore even him. Chapter 1440, Marital Harmony. Chapter 1440, Marital Harmony. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was forcefully dragged aside by Ling Han, and she said in irritation, You already gave me some alchemical pills a few days ago. Why are you bringing me more so soon? Because I miss you. Ling Han said with a smile. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden stared at him and said, Are you having dirty thoughts? Ling Han chuckled drily and replied, Is thinking of you a dirty thought? Sigh, where is the basic trust that should exist between people? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden also chuckled, saying, If your hands weren't groping me, perhaps I might have believed you. Ling Han put on a serious expression and said, I'm giving you a body examination to determine whether you've become fatter or skinnier. Then have I become fatter or skinnier? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden asked, giving him a sideways glance. Your body feels so nice, Ling Han whispered into her ear, not giving a direct answer. Each of his hands had already conquered one of her shapely breasts, his warm breath flowing down her smooth and jade-like neck. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was blushing so much that even her neck had a pink tinge to it. This was an intoxicating sight. Damn pervert, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden murmured quietly. Her 2 breasts had been conquered, and this caused her blood to course through her body in excitement. Moreover, her neck was actually an even more sensitive location, and the warm breath flowing over it caused her slender body to involuntarily shudder. Wife, your body is so soft and supple, Ling Han said smugly. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden's reaction was the best encouragement for him. Stop mucking around. I still need to cultivate, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden said. She was very easily embarrassed. Say, wife, you were thick-skinned enough to act as my widow for 10,000 years. No matter what, I have to make you my true wife today. Only then will I be able to repay your loyal feelings. Ling Han started to strip her clothes, one layer after another. You damn pervert! The heavenly phoenix divine maiden hurriedly tried to stop him. However, whenever she tried to guard a part of her body, another part of her body would be stripped naked. In the end, she failed to guard any part of her body. Ling Han clicked his tongue in wonder, saying, Wife, your skin is so white and smooth, almost as if it's carved out of jade. See, my hands can't stop themselves. They've already slid to the bottom. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was incredibly embarrassed, and she couldn't help but glare at him. Ling Han was actually teasing her. Please don't. In her current state, she could only beg Ling Han to stop. Ling Han chuckled and said, Wife, when you went to my place back then, you would take whatever you wanted. However, did I ever argue with you? After 10,000 years, it's time for me to seek the repayment along with some interest. Ling Han, young Master Han, Brother Han. The more the heavenly phoenix, divine maiden, called him, the more seductive her voice became. In fact, her last exclamation of Brother Han almost melted Ling Han's heart. Just let me off once, okay? Okay. Call me brother a few more times, Ling Han said, not retreating from his position. Brother Han, good brother, the heavenly phoenix divine maiden called, her face flushed completely red. This is more like it. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden breathed a sigh of relief. Was Ling Han finally going to retreat? However, she was immediately astonished because not only was Ling Han showing no signs of retreat, but he was even taking things a step further, grabbing her in his arms and carrying her into the bedroom. You're going back on your words. She was almost about to cry. She hurriedly wrapped her arms around Ling Han's neck, not allowing him to put her down. She then bit his shoulder and said, Ling Han, why are you going back on your words? Hee. When did I say I would retreat if you called me brother? Ling Han asked with a mischievous grin. Damn pervert. I'll fight to the death with you. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden twisted her slender body as she started to aggressively resist. Pung, pung, pung. The two of them became entangled as they scuffled. Ow, ow. Ling Han suddenly cried out in agony, saying, Wife, where are you kicking? That's little Han. If you break little Han, the one who suffers will be you. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was both embarrassed and worried. She had accidentally kicked Ling Han between his legs. It's not hurt, is it? How can it not be hurt? There's a burning sensation all over it. Gasp. I think my balls are about to shatter. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was so worried that the color drained from her face. She had only been embarrassed, and it wasn't as if she didn't want to make love with Ling Han. What should we do? What should we do? Can you check it for me and also console little Han? The heavenly phoenix divine maiden faltered for a moment before realizing that she had fallen victim to Ling Han's evil ploy. Just how astonishing was his physique! How could he have been injured by her? She aggressively hammered his chest, exclaiming, Damn pervert, you're playing tricks on me again! However, Ling Han ignored her words, instead passionately sealing her lips with a kiss. This caused the heavenly phoenix divine maiden to gradually calm down. She then reached over and wrapped her arms around his neck, their tangling bodies causing her to finally lose her defenses. Ling Han finally entered her, causing her to let out a soft and intoxicating moan. This was a passionate and steamy affair. After a long while, the bedroom finally fell quiet. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden was resting in Ling Han's lap, her beautiful cheeks still flushed an intoxicating red. She punched Ling Han's chest, saying, You bullied me! After being bullied by you for so many years, can't you allow me to bully you once or twice? Ling Han laughed heartily and continued, I'm a man, so I won't argue with you. Just let me spank your bottom 10 times a day. In your dreams. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden jumped up in fright. However, how could she escape from Ling Han's grasp? Ling Han reached over and immediately pulled her back. Pa, pa, pa. He aggressively spanked her bottom. The heavenly phoenix divine maiden's shapely bottom undulated with his strikes, and this was an indescribably beautiful scene. TSK, 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 not bad. I have to make this a daily habit of mine. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had already passed. There was great marital harmony between Ling Han and the heavenly phoenix divine maiden, his yang supplementing her yin, and her yin supplementing his yang. Moreover, with the help of an exorbitant amount of alchemical pills, both of them saw improvements in their cultivation level. One of them advanced to the high extreme, while the other advanced to the medium extreme. Meanwhile, Ding Ping and Jiao also advanced rapidly, both of them successfully breaking through to the heavenly body tier. Following this, there was no more significant weakness in their group. At the same time, Gu Daoi's name was also becoming more and more renowned. In fact, there was even a faint suggestion that he was the number one king tier of the younger generation. Although he hadn't advanced to the eternal river tier, yet it was rumored that he was already invincible among the heavenly body tier. Several more months passed, and the North Emperor and the Stone Emperor finally arrived together. They then both came over to visit Ling Han. Ling Han was relatively famous after all, so it was extremely easy to find him. Brother Ling. These two clearly weren't from the same galaxy, yet they always seemed to be together. It was hard not to suspect that there was some unspeakable secret between them. Brother Stone, Brother North. Ling Han exclaimed as he walked over to greet them. Brother Ling sure is extraordinary. Only less than 100 years have passed, yet you've already advanced to the high extreme of the heavenly body tier. This is truly incredible, the Stone Emperor exclaimed. He had already held Ling Han in high enough regard, yet he was still given a start by Ling Han's astonishing growth. However, Ling Han shook his head, saying, "I'm still no match for you two." He couldn't see through the Stone Emperor and North Emperor's auras, and this signified that they were most likely at the consummate level of the heavenly body tier, perhaps even the pinnacle level. "Oh, Ling Han, are you trying to be humble, or are you trying to show off?" The North Emperor remarked with a shake of his head. "Anyhow, several powerful king tiers have popped up recently. We truly can't underestimate the talents of this world." The Stone Emperor nodded in agreement, saying, "Perhaps the universe is entering a golden age of cultivation. Those who advance to the position of saint in this age might create history and even shatter the unreachable barriers, maybe even becoming saint kings." Chapter 1441 Great Opportunity at the Sunken Abyss Valley. Chapter 1441 Great Opportunity at the Sunken Abyss Valley. Saints were rare, and saint kings were even rarer. The latter were the true king tiers of the immortal realm, possessing the ability to kill even great saints with a simple wave of their hand. However, there was no such king tier nearby, at least not in the surrounding hundreds of galaxies. Even when looking 10 billion years into the past, no such king tier had ever existed in this region of the universe. I don't know about saint kings, but it's rumored that the Star Sand Saint is about to reach the end of his lifespan. When a great saint returns to Tao, this will definitely affect the circulation of heaven and earth. Perhaps this can even give the younger generations a glimpse into the secrets of becoming a saint. The North Emperor was slightly more conservative in his vision of the future. After accumulating in preparation for so long, a saint king will definitely be produced in this new age, the Stone Emperor said with confidence. The two of them started to argue, their faces quickly becoming beet red with fervor. In the end, they almost came to punches. Fortunately, the Rain Emperor arrived at just the right moment, not speaking a word as he directly launched an attack. They then ascended into the sky as they engaged in battle, the Rain Emperor displaying his domineering demeanor as he challenged two king tiers alone. However, the Rain Emperor was truly powerful, not being pushed onto his back foot even though he was battling against two fellow king tiers. Meanwhile, the North Emperor and Stone Emperor couldn't bring themselves to summon their god tools. After all, they were already enjoying a significant advantage. In the end, after half a day, the battle concluded as a draw. How enjoyable! The Rain Emperor laughed heartily as he descended from the sky. "Brother Ling, who is this? He's also a fearsome prodigy," the Stone Emperor asked with a smile. However, this battle hadn't hurt his confidence. The Rain Emperor was most skilled with his fists, so it made little difference whether he used a weapon or not. However, it was a different story for the Stone Emperor and North Emperor, both of who could only unleash their full power when using their weapons. Thus, with their battle prowess suppressed, it wasn't embarrassing that they had only managed to draw against the Rain Emperor. even though they had fought against him 2-on-1. "This is my second brother," Ling Han said, introducing the Rain Emperor to the Stone Emperor and the North Emperor. The Stone Emperor and the North Emperor clicked their tongue in wonderment. "You guys are insanely impressive. Both of you have come from a small world. Yet both of you have managed to become rank 2 king tiers." It was almost accepted as a fact that a galaxy could only produce 2 rank 2 king tiers at any one time. Moreover, this would have to be a super large galaxy. However, Ling Han and his second brother had shattered this fact, both of them having come from the same small world. Ling Han smiled faintly. There was also Ding Pingy had also come from the lower realm, and he was also a rank 2 king tier. "I can finally confirm it now. We're definitely entering the most brilliant golden age of cultivation," the North Emperor said with a clap of his hands. "However, I wonder if it's a fortune or a curse to be born during this age," the Stone Emperor said, sighing in emotion. "From what I know, there are at least 5 rank 3 king tiers." 5. Ling Han's expression suddenly became serious. Being a rank 3 king tier at the heavenly body tier. What did this signify? It signified that they had definitely reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier. "There's Gu Daoyi and also Empress Luan Xing here," the North Emperor said as he counted on his fingers. "In addition to them, there's also Zi Qinfeng, Long Xiangyue, and second in the world." Second in the world. Ling Han couldn't help but interrupt the North Emperor. How did someone possess a name such as this? You might not know, but there's legitimately a clan called the World. According to the legends, a great elite had once appeared in this clan. This elite so powerful that he could do anything as he pleased. It was also at that time that he changed their surname to the World. Second in the World wasn't named second before, but because of his astonishing cultivation talent that was showing signs of equaling his great ancestor, his name was changed to second. The significance of this is that his ancestor is first, while he follows directly after as second, the Stone Emperor explained. This, how arrogant, how confident. Ling Han couldn't help but feel excited. This would definitely be a lot of fun. At the very least, he wouldn't need to worry about not having opponents. "Brother Ling, if we don't reach the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier, we won't even possess the right to challenge these people. We'll only be able to advance to the eternal river tier and wait for them to be dragged back to the same starting line as us. However, since they've reached an extra pinnacle level, they'll still possess a noticeable advantage even if we all advance to the same cultivation level." The Stone Emperor and the North Emperor both shook their heads as they said this. They had both reached 2 pinnacle levels, but just how difficult was it to reach the 3rd pinnacle level? After all, most of the current saints were only rank 2 king tiers as well. This was already incredibly impressive. However, who told them to live the golden age of cultivation? During this age, rank 2 king tiers would be nothing to be impressed about. After all, 5 rank 3 king tiers had already emerged. Moreover, these were only the ones that the Stone Emperor knew about. In other words, there were at least 5 rank 3 king tiers. Even though they were the son and disciple of saints, it was still impossible for them to gather all of the information on the king tiers of the hundreds of nearby galaxies. "Oh, that's right. Brother Ling, do you know why we arrived slightly earlier?" the North Emperor suddenly asked. "Isn't it to prepare?" Ling Han asked in reply. "No," the Stone Emperor answered with a shake of his head. He paused for a moment before continuing. "Before the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy starts recruiting, there's another great opportunity that lies before it." In other words, the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy only starts recruiting after the battle for this great opportunity is over, the North Emperor added. Ling Han's interest was immediately piqued, and he asked, "What's this great opportunity all about?" "There's a place called the Sunken Abyss Valley on this Would Figure planet," the Stone Emperor explained. "During normal times, This valley is as ordinary as can be. It produces neither godly medicines nor any godly metals. However, every once in a while, this valley will undergo some mystical transformation. The North Emperor took over, saying, "At that time the rocks inside the valley will all fly upward when trodden upon by a living being. Through battling and snatching the rocks of others, one can continue to rise higher and higher. Only when one person reaches the peak of the valley does the competition finally come to an end. At that time, heaven and earth will rain a sweet dew. Those who are higher up will naturally be bathed in more of this dew, thus gaining the ability to temper their body and advance their cultivation. However, the requirement is that one has ascended to a suitable height," the Stone Emperor said. "If anyone tells me that you two aren't wearing the same pants, I'll call bulls *T. Ling Han gazed at the two of them with a strange expression. This caused the Stone Emperor and the North Emperor to both feel uncomfortable. "What's with your strange gaze?" After a moment, Ling Han asked, "Isn't this unfair? If one possesses a higher cultivation level, won't it be easier for them to reach a greater height?" The North Emperor smiled and replied, "Firstly, this competition has its limits. Those who are at the Eternal River tier are forbidden from participating. In any case, the floating rocks can't carry their weight. This is also why only those at the Heavenly Body tier come to apply for the Star San Martial Arts Academy. Even if one is capable of advancing to the Eternal River tier, they'll forcefully suppress their cultivation from reaching this level. This is for no other reason than the great opportunity at the Sunken Abyss Valley. Secondly, as long as you step onto a floating rock, your cultivation level will be suppressed to the early stage of the low extreme of the Heavenly Body tier," the Stone Emperor continued, his cooperation with the North Emperor incredibly smooth. In other words, this is genuinely a battle between cultivators at the same cultivation level. Thirdly, even if you possess a freakish physique as you do, this will be largely useless in the valley. This is because your opponents can target the floating rocks beneath your feet. Once your floating rock is destroyed, your only choice is to fall to the ground and start over again. The Rain Emperor laughed heartily and said, "Brilliant! This sounds like an amazing idea. When does it begin?" "Soon. It should begin within these few months," the North Emperor replied. However, even though everyone's cultivation level is suppressed to the low extreme of the Heavenly Body tier, those who have reached a pinnacle level will still possess some advantage, the Stone Emperor said with a solemn expression. "Rank 3 King tiers will possess the largest advantage, with at least 1 star of extra power compared to everyone else. Gu Daoyi, Empress Luanxing, Zi Qinfeng, Long Xiangyue, and second in the world will definitely be the most powerful competitors this time," the North Emperor said. "So, my proposal is that we can team up to defeat these individuals first. Is that allowed?" Ling Han asked in surprise. "Why not?" the Stone Emperor asked in reply. You were just saying how fair this competition was, yet in the blink of an eye, you're proposing that we team up. How is that fair? Can 5 or 6 people reach the peak in unison?" Ling Han asked. "No," the North Emperor replied with a shake of his head. "However, the competition in the Sunken Abyss Valley is divided up into 2 stages. During the first stage, teaming up is allowed. However, after reaching a certain height, teaming up isn't allowed any longer. Moreover, only those who reach this cutoff height will be able to receive the blessings of heaven and earth. Right now, there's only Brother Ling and Brother Rain Emperor here. We plan to recruit a few more people to join our team. We want a team of 12 to be precise," the Rain Emperor said. Chapter 1442, Gathering of King Tears. Chapter 1442, Gathering of King Tears. Ling Han waved his hand and said, "I still have some companions here. We can fill up an extra 8 spots." 8! The Stone Emperor exclaimed in slight astonishment. They couldn't fill their team with inferior cultivators. At the very least, these had to be rank 2 King tiers. Ling Han nodded and said, "Yes, 8. Brother Ling, not to offend you, but are you sure that apart from you and the Rain Emperor, these other people won't be a burden? The North Emperor asked with a serious expression. I'm sure. Ling Han replied with a nod. Regardless of whether it was his 2 disciples or Su Ran, which of them wasn't a rank 2 king tier? In fact, Empress Luanxing was more so a rank 3 king tier. As for the notionless saint, well, he was a saint. If he unleashed his aura, that would be enough to petrify a good portion of people. Seizing this opportunity to attack, they would definitely be able to achieve brilliant results. Only the heavenly phoenix divine maiden was slightly weaker. However, as a rank 1 king tier, she wouldn't be too much of a burden. All right, the Stone Emperor said with a nod. Then we'll go and search for 2 more team members. No problem. Ling Han said with a nod. In fact, he could also introduce 2 more team members. For example, Yu Ying and Yang Lin, king tiers from the Long Light Galaxy. At that time, he had also developed a good relationship with them. However, this was the Stone Emperor and North Emperor's suggestion. After all, so it would be rude for him to make all the decisions. When will the Sunken Abyss Valley open? The Rain Emperor asked. It won't be too long. Apparently, the rock faces of the Sunken Abyss Valley are already starting to glow. When this glow becomes as bright as the sun, that will be the moment when the valley opens, the North Emperor replied. Then we'll patiently wait for you too, Ling Han said with a smile. The Stone Emperor and North Emperor took their leave. They had to find the remaining 2 team members as soon as possible. After they left, Ling Han specially traveled to the Sunken Abyss Valley. Sure enough, just as the Stone Emperor and North Emperor had said, there was nothing special about this valley. There were rocks everywhere, and there wasn't any plant, beast, or insect in view. This was a completely desolate and lifeless valley. Now, however, the rock faces of the valley were glowing, just that this glow wasn't very bright. In fact, this glow could barely be seen in the morning. Only when night fell would this soft glow become obvious. However, this changed extremely quickly, with the glow becoming visible in the morning after just 7 days' time. At this rate, it was safe to assume that this glow would become as bright as the sun in another 10 days' time. Ling Han returned to his residence. After a few days, he saw the Stone Emperor and North Emperor return, another 2 men behind them. These men possessed mighty auras, and their demeanor was as if they were the center of the universe. One couldn't help but cast their gaze over. However, these 2 men were truly haughty, this haughtiness not only in appearance, but also from the depths of their very being. Here, let me introduce them, the North Emperor said with a smile. This here is Nia Tiancheng, Brother Nia. He's the youngest out of the Flying Rain Saints' 18 disciples. However, his talent is the most outstanding. Nia Tiancheng smiled, this smile appearing relatively amicable. However, the arrogance and haughtiness that radiated from him could be sensed from a good 10 kilometers away. This here is Shan Jingyi, Brother Shan, the North Emperor said as he pointed at the other man. Brother Shan is a disciple of the 6 Mountain Saint. Shan Jingyi also nodded at Ling Han, his expression still as haughty as could be. These 2 king tiers were truly full of themselves. Where are the others? Shan Jingyi asked. Didn't you say that there are already 12 members? There was a look of impatience on his face. Of course, he was displeased. Shouldn't these people have finished preparing long ago? Once they arrived, it should have been time for them to all set off. So, why was Ling Han the only one here? Where were the others? He actually had to wait for these remaining people? Humph! How arrogant! Brother Ling, we've filled up all 12 spots of our team now, and the opening of the Sunken Abyss Valley is also imminent. So, gather the others and we'll immediately set off, the North Emperor said with a smile. Understood. Ling Han said with a nod. Glancing at Nia Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi, he had a feeling that these 2 individuals were far too haughty. He was sure that their haughtiness would eventually become poisonous tumor to their team. In fact, after learning of the sunken abyss valley's existence, the Rain Emperor and the others hadn't gone out to challenge any other king tiers. Thus, the 7 of them arrived in the guest hall in no time after receiving news of the others' arrival. Upon seeing Empress Luanxing, Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi both exclaimed in surprise and adoration. Although they couldn't see her features, just her figure and aura alone were enough to enchant them and tug at their heartstrings. This was definitely a breathtaking beauty. Their haughtiness suddenly disappeared, and they both actively stepped forward to introduce themselves. I'm Shan Jingyi. I'm Nie Tiancheng. To say nothing of them, even the Stone Emperor and North Emperor were stunned by her beauty. However, as Ling Han's good friends, they naturally couldn't act so brazenly. Thus, they didn't step forward to introduce themselves. Who was Empress Luanxing? In terms of pride, who could compare to her? She completely ignored Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi, having eyes only for Ling Han. This caused Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi to feel even more displeased with Ling Han. There was a peculiar glimmer in the eyes, and it was a mystery what they were pondering over or planning to do. Let's go! The 12 of them set off for the sunken Abyss Valley. Ling Han's residence was quite far from the sunken Abyss Valley, so even though they were king tiers at the heavenly body tier, they would still need to walk for an entire 2 days if they didn't travel at full speed. However, there was no need for them to hurry, as they still had plenty of time until the valley opened. Thus, they only arrived at their destination after walking for 2 days. At this time, the sunken Abyss Valley was already overflowing with people. This type of rare opportunity would only come about once every several million years, after all. Moreover, this valley would suppress their cultivation level and even allow them to form teams. With these factors, even rank 3 king tiers wouldn't possess an overwhelming advantage. Thus, who wouldn't travel here to test their luck out? If they obtained the great opportunity of this valley, perhaps they would be able to transform their life and destiny. A prodigy might become a king tier, and a king tier might become a king among kings. Gazing around, the valley was already packed full of people. Right now, the entire valley was radiating with a soft glow that was clearly brilliant, yet not piercing to the eyes. This will definitely be an intense and cutthroat competition, everyone exclaimed with emotion. This competition could be viewed as the prelude to the recruitment competition of the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy. In fact, the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy would also send people over to observe the competition. This was both to prevent mishaps and to keep an eye out for any outstanding individuals. After all, talent was only an intangible asset, while strength and battle prowess were the true qualities of king tiers. Although not every king tier would participate in this competition, at least 90% of them definitely would. If one hadn't reached or surpassed the heavenly body tier, they would have no option but to sit aside and spectate the competition. This valley would only suppress one's cultivation level, not raise one's cultivation level. As such, if one were at the Sun-Moon tier, they would still remain at the Sun-Moon tier even if they entered the valley. In that case, they would be nothing more than cannon fodder. Ling Han swept his gaze over the sea of cultivators, and after searching for a long time, he finally found the king tiers from the long light galaxy. Right now, all of them were standing together. As mentioned before, when casting one's eyes over the entire universe, those who were from the same galaxy would naturally feel closer to each other. This was especially the case for weaker galaxies like the Long Light Galaxy. This galaxy had only produced a mere 3 king tiers. Afterward, Ling Han also saw Faceless. However, he was located too far away, so Ling Han didn't walk over to say hi to him. Then he also saw Gu Daoyi. In the entire immortal realm, Ling Han was most likely the first person to have learned of Gu Daoyi's existence. However, he had only heard his voice at the time and hadn't actually seen him in person. Right now, he was finally able to see him. He wasn't difficult to find. In fact, he was incredibly easy to find as he was like a crane among a bunch of chickens. There was an empty region of at least 30 meters around him, and a circle of people was standing around him, their eyes fervent with excitement. Gudawi wasn't extremely handsome, yet his skin was as smooth as jade and his hair was jet black like ink. His aura was indescribably elegant and ethereal. This was a divine fetus. Chapter 1443. Extreme Troublemaker, Large Black Dog. Chapter 1443. Extreme Troublemaker, Large Black Dog. That truly is a divine fetus, nurtured by the 9 Deaths Heaven art. Empress Luan Xing whispered in Ling Han's ear. In fact, she had used her divine sense to transmit this message. Thus, unless there was a saint beside them, no one else could have heard what she had just said. Her hand was gripping Ling Han's wrist, and even with Ling Han's freakish physique, he still felt a slight pain shooting through his arm. This was a sign of just how emotional Empress Luan Xing was. As if feeling their gaze, Gudawi also turned around to glance at them. However, his gaze didn't stop on Ling Han. In his eyes, Ling Han naturally wasn't worthy of his attention. Instead, his gaze landed on Empress Luan Xing. His eyes narrowed, and a meaningful smile tugged at the corners of his lips. It was evident that he had discovered that Empress Luan Xing was also practicing the 9 Deaths Heaven art. Just as he was a delicious meal to Empress Luan Xing, perhaps Empress Luan Xing was also a delicious meal to him. Perhaps she could help his divine fetus become even more extraordinary. Hurry, stop that dog. This dirty dog is far too uncouth. It's running around and biting people everywhere. A wave of commotion swept through the dense crowd, and it could be seen that a large black dog was currently running over from the distance, a huge group of people behind him. These people wore furious expressions, and it was clear that they were all seething with anger. Ling Han couldn't help but grimace. That was none other than the large black dog from the Medicine King's cave. Right now, it wasn't as large as a mountain, but instead the size of an ordinary dog. Its fur was ink black and shiny like oil. However, this dog was truly a huge troublemaker, attracting the anger of so many people right upon arriving. In fact, his halo of trouble was even more intense than Ling Han's. The large black dog was extremely provocative as he ran, shouting, "Little sh*TS, why are you running so slow? How about Grandpa Dog takes a handicap of 2 legs?" As he said this, he indeed stood up, running on his 2 hind legs. Pooh! Many people instantly spluttered with laughter. However, those chasing him were incensed even further. This was far too detestable. Little sh*TS, you still haven't caught up? So be it. Grandpa Dog will walk upside down now. How does that sound? The large black dog leaned on his front paws as if doing a handstand. However, his speed was still incredibly fast. His provocations were definitely extremely effective. He was running away using just his front paws, yet he was still faster than all of the people pursuing him. He was truly smacking them across the face again and again. Fucking C** and T-Dog. We definitely have to capture and cut him into 10,000 pieces. I've never seen such a shameless demonic dog before. He's so bloody shameless. Die. The pursuing people were burning with rage, and it was as if flames were spitting out from their eyes. The large black dog was not only extremely quick, but also incredibly agile. He was like a fish in water as he slithered through the dense crowd of cultivators. Meanwhile, those pursuing him came across barrier after barrier, causing them to fall further and further behind the large black dog. Huh, isn't this little Han? Come, call me Grandpa. The large black dog involuntarily stopped upon seeing Ling Han, waving his paw in greeting. However, he was in a handstand position right now, so this greeting was truly as peculiar as could be. Ling Han was rendered speechless. This large black dog was just as debauched as always. He was always seeking to take advantage of others. This woman seems all right. She's fairly beautiful. Why don't you become my maid? The large black dog stared at Empress Luanxing, attracted by her charm even though he was a dog. Drool started to roll down from his mouth. How audacious! Nie Tiancheng immediately roared. He was intent on making a good impression before Empress Luanxing, so he immediately launched a strike at the large black dog. Numerous heavenly bodies instantly materialized in the air. These weren't the heavenly bodies from his dantian, but rather heavenly bodies that had been formed from his cultivation technique. The surrounding space was filled with heavenly bodies. What are shouting about, ugly wretch? See how Grandpa Dog disposes of you. The large black dog immediately leaped forward, surprisingly breaking through Nie Tiancheng's attack. He then ruthlessly bit down on Nie Tiancheng's wrist. Ow wow! Nie Tiancheng instantly held in agony. Back then, even Ling Han had felt some slight pain after being bitten by the large black dog. However, could Nie Tiancheng's physique compare to Ling Han's? Thus, this bite instantly drew blood. Moreover, Nie Tiancheng couldn't shake the large black dog off no matter what he did. Let go! Let go! Nie Tiancheng was almost on the verge of tears. This large black dog was far too uncouth. It was actually biting people. Of the elites in the world, whoever fought like this. There was a loud crack as Nie Tiancheng's arm was brutally bitten off. Carrying this broken arm in his mouth, the large black dog continued to run away. This was because the people chasing him had already arrived before Ling Han. Detestable dog, return my arm. Nie Tiancheng also started to chase after the large black dog. Although he could regrow his arm, doing so would definitely consume a portion of his life force. Thus, he naturally wanted to snatch his severed arm back. That way, attaching his severed limb would consume much less of his life force. Come, chase Grandpa Dog. The large black dog stood up on his hind legs again, running as quick as the wind. Don't say that Grandpa Dog is scolding you people, but you people truly are a group of trash. Detestable dog. See asterisk and T-Dog. The group of people was beside themselves with rage as they continued to chase after the large black dog. Shan Jingyi couldn't help but celebrate his luck. Thankfully, he had been a split second slower than Nie Tiancheng. Otherwise, the person with the broken arm might have been him. Although he was conceited, he didn't think that he was stronger than Nie Tiancheng. Thus, there was naturally a lingering fear in his mind. Anyhow, perhaps this large black dog wasn't truly as powerful as he seemed. However, he was indeed mysterious, and it seemed as if origin power couldn't do much to stop his advance. Add to that his terrifying teeth, and this large black dog truly made for a difficult opponent. Moreover, he was also incredibly quick, immediately running away whenever he was done with provoking someone. This gave his victims absolutely no chance of exacting revenge. Nie Tiancheng had truly suffered a great misfortune. With the large black dog causing trouble everywhere, the originally serious atmosphere instantly descended into chaos. The cultivators all laughed heartily as they watched the large black dog running around and causing trouble everywhere. However, those who became his victim would all immediately seethe with rage. Grandpa Dog is certain to reach the pinnacle of this world. I'm recruiting servants now, and this is a rare chance for you to apply. If you miss this opportunity, you might never see it again. The large black dog continued to shout as he ran. It was a mystery where he had thrown Nie Tiancheng's broken arm. You, and you. Grandpa Dog will give you people an opportunity, the large black dog said as he continuously pointed at random people. Those who were pointed at naturally became enraged. Most of the people here were king tiers, yet this dog was actually asking them to become his slaves? How could they accept this? The dignity of king tiers couldn't be violated. Some people were easygoing, and they simply shrugged this off with a smile, acting as if nothing had happened. However, many more people were infuriated, joining the group of people chasing the large black dog. This large black dog was truly born to be a troublemaker. If one were to ask who was the most famous at this moment, the answer would definitely be the large black dog. His renown had instantly surged past that of Gu Daoyi and Empress Wanxing. However, his renown was for his detestable nature, and he was much like a street mouse, hated and cursed by everyone. Sigh, Grandpa Dog is far too brilliant. My brilliance is even attracting the jealousy of others. There was a narcissistic look on the large black dog's face. Detestable dog, fight us if you dare. The pack of chasing people was about to go crazy with rage. The large black dog waved a paw and said, Grandpa Dog doesn't want to bully you people. As he said this, he continued to run away, not even stopping for an instant. After chasing him for half a day, not even a single person had managed to catch up to him. The large black dog was genuinely too quick. Moreover, the path that he had taken was also quirky and unpredictable. It was no wonder that he dared to provoke so many people. If one wanted to become the enemy of the people, they would first need to master the training of their legs. 3 days passed, and the large black dog was still running around, as provocative as always. So far, he had already offended almost 1/10 of the people present at the valley. There was now a vast group of people chasing after him. Right at this moment, a column of light suddenly rose from the valley. At the same time, a humongous golden boulder also soared into the sky, instantly reaching a height of 300 meters above the valley. It then stopped and hovered in place, radiating with a boundless divine light as it did so. The sunken abyss valley has opened. Chapter 1444, Pseudo-Saint Tool. Chapter 1444, Pseudo-Saint Tool. Following the opening of the sunken abyss valley, everyone instantly lost interest in battling the detestable large black dog. They could kill this detestable dog later, but the great opportunity presented by the sunken abyss valley wouldn't appear again. If they missed this opportunity, there would be no next time. Everyone surged toward the valley. When the valley had been glowing before, there had been a mystical barrier preventing them from entering. Right now, the first person had already stepped onto a piece of rock, which instantly rose into the air. However, it only rose 6 meters into the air, not ascending any further. Then the second and third person arrived, both of them stepping onto rocks that rose into the air. Intense battles immediately broke out, and it wasn't long before the floating rocks of some cultivators were shattered. These shattered rocks didn't fall to the ground, but were instead absorbed by the floating rocks beneath the victor's feet. These floating rocks would then grow larger, thereby allowing them to ascend higher into the air. However, there was also a limitation. That was, each piece of floating rock would only have a movement range of 6 meters in the up and down direction. When these floating rocks grew larger, they would merely carry the cultivator to a greater height. However, the range of its movement wouldn't increase at all. As a result, the regions of battle became confined into the shape of a pyramid. The lower one was, the more intense the battles would be. Meanwhile, the higher one was, the fewer people there would be, meaning that it was also much more difficult to rise any higher. Hurry, we need to get a move on too, Shan Jingyi said. Nia Tiancheng had already returned, though his expression was livid and dark. He hadn't managed to find his broken arm, so he was left with no option but to consume his life force to grow a new one. This naturally caused great harm to his life force. However, if he were able to find some natural treasures, perhaps he could still regain this lost life force. Meanwhile, there was a look of toxic resentment in his eyes as he gazed at Ling Han. This was because he had seen Ling Han being greeted by the large black dog, and since he had been unable to capture the large black dog, he naturally heaped all of his anger and resentment onto Ling Han. This was truly undeserved hate. Ling Han took note of this, but he didn't say anything. If Nia Tiancheng truly dared to target him, he would definitely strike back and suppress him. They were only temporary allies after all, and this alliance would naturally fall apart once they reached the cutoff height. Thus, Ling Han didn't have any intention of helping Nie Tiancheng or Shan Jingyi achieve good results. The only reason he hadn't become immediately hostile was to give the North Emperor and Stone Emperor face. After all, it was them who had informed him about the Star Sand Martial Arts Academy and the Sunken Abyss Valley. Of course, both were major events, and Ling Han would have eventually found out about them even if they hadn't informed him. The team of 12 entered the valley. There were floating rocks everywhere, and it was as if they could never be used up. Thus, each of the 12 king tiers quickly found a floating rock to step onto. They all rose to a height of 6 meters, where they then began to search for opponents. Celestial Maiden, I'll definitely protect you. Shan Jingyi said to Empress Luanxing. I will too. Nie Tiancheng hurriedly said. Looks of displeasure instantly spread across the North Emperor's and Stone Emperor's face. Although Empress Luanxing hadn't introduced herself, anyone with eyes would have realized that she was in a relationship with Ling Han. They were all in an alliance right now, so is it really a good idea to flirt with the partner of a fellow ally? This was incredibly rude. However, Shan Jingyi and Nie Tiancheng didn't pay any heed to this, continuing to fawn over Empress Luanxing. It was as if Ling Han didn't exist in their eyes. Moreover, it was clear that they were purposefully ignoring their relationship and trying to steal Empress Luanxing from him. In their eyes, Ling Han was completely unworthy of a woman as beautiful and charming as Empress Luanxing. Only supreme prodigies like them could be worthy of her. However, if they had spent the time to gather some information, perhaps their confidence wouldn't be as full as it was now. This was because Ling Han was a rank 2 king tier. In other words, he was no weaker than them. Meanwhile, Empress Luanxing was even more terrifying, being publicly acknowledged as one of the most powerful king tiers. However, how could they have gone out to gather information? Firstly, they were extremely conceited individuals who looked down on all other prodigies and king tiers. Secondly, they had been completely enchanted by the Empress figure and charm. Ling Han smiled faintly and prevented Empress Luanxing from attacking them. He used his divine sense to transmit a message, saying, "We'll kick them down when we reach the peak." "Sure," Empress Luanxing replied, an intoxicating smile on her face. However, it was a pity that no one could see this smile. With her personality, she would immediately kill any person that she detested. However, since Ling Han had other plans, it wouldn't hurt to wait for a while longer. Her gentleness and understanding were only reserved for one person, Ling Han. There was already an undercurrent of animosity sweeping through the team of 12. However, this animosity still had yet to rise to the surface and explode. They started to attack the other teams. Since the rules permitted it, most of the cultivators here had chosen to form teams. After all, those who were alone would obviously be at a very huge disadvantage. Thus, there were teams of 3, teams of 7, and other teams of all shapes and sizes. Those teams that had less than 12 members most likely simply hadn't managed to recruit enough members. After all, even super large galaxies could only produce 10 or so king tiers. Meanwhile, large galaxies could only produce 7 to 8, while small galaxies could only produce 3 to 4. If the king tiers weren't familiar with each other, who dared to entrust their back to strangers? Teams like the one that Ling Han was in were relatively rare. Generally speaking, cultivators wouldn't trust those from foreign galaxies so easily. The first team that they came across was a team of 3. Although there were few people, their strength wasn't weak. After all, everyone's cultivation level had already been suppressed to the early stage of the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. As such, even the gap between rank 3 king tiers and rank 1 king tiers wasn't very large. Nie Tiancheng had been humiliated before, so he naturally wanted to regain his face now. Thus, he was the first person to charge over. He summoned a peach branch that had 7 flowers on it, each of them exuding a faint and refreshing fragrance. Boom! Whipping this peach branch, it was as if a towering tree had instantly materialized into the world, suppressing the lands and holding up the heavens. Ling Han couldn't help but feel astonished. What god tool is this? It seems fairly impressive. This is the rumored celestial branch, the North Emperor exclaimed. He turned around to explain this to the others, saying, according to the legends, during a transformative period of the skies, a celestial tree once appeared in the void. It swept through the universe, possessing a profound might that prevented anyone from nearing it. Unfortunately, perhaps it had received significant damage when traveling through the void, and this caused it to shrivel and die very quickly. However, it still bore a single fruit that was obtained by the Flying Rain Saint. After planting this fruit and using all kinds of divine soil to nurture it, it finally sprouted and grew after 900 million years. This is a celestial peach tree, and it only produces 2 fruits every 100 million years. To cultivators, these fruits are profound great herbs that can compare to the rarest of saint fruits. However, this is only a child tree. The mother tree would have most likely produced even better fruits. In any case, this is the origin of the celestial tree. My master teamed up with the Flying Rain Saint once, trying to determine where the mother tree had come from. However, it was a shame that they ended up vomiting blood even though they had used heaven-defying techniques. They weren't able to discover a shred of new information. Anyhow, the branch that Brother Niet is holding has come from none other than the child tree. It can be viewed as a saint tool, something that can be refined into a pseudo-saint tool. Pseudo-saint tool. No wonder it's so impressive. It was able to release a heaven-suppressing aura immediately upon being summoned. Ling Han and his companions exchanged a glance, all of them reaching a speculation that was probably close to the truth the mother tree had come from the celestial realm. This was almost certain, as only the celestial realm was capable of nurturing great herbs that were above the immortal level. A haughty smile appeared on Nie Tiancheng's face. This should have been an important secret, but he wanted to show off and also impress Empress Luanxing. Thus, he allowed the North Emperor to explain the secret of his pseudo-saint tool. He roared loudly as he whipped the peach branch toward his 3 opponents. Countless flowers instantly blossomed in the air, each of them lush and brimming with vitality. It was almost impossible to determine whether these flowers were real or illusory. "Explode!" Nie Tiancheng shouted. "Pa, pa, pa, pa!" The peach flowers instantly exploded, their devastating power causing the group of 3 to howl in agony. They all fell from their floating rocks. At the same time, these floating rocks exploded into pieces, these shattered pieces being absorbed by the floating rocks beneath Ling Han's and the others' feet. Chapter 1445, Crushing Power. Chapter 1445, Crushing Power. In fact, in this abyss, even saint tools would be suppressed, not being able to unleash their full power. Thus, it was only natural that pseudo-saint tools would be suppressed even more. However, saintly material was saintly material after all. This was analogous to how rank 3 king tiers would still be slightly more powerful than rank 2 and rank 1 king tiers, even when their cultivation level was suppressed. Nie Tiancheng's 3 opponents had only been rank 1 king tiers, so how could they have opposed him at rank 2 king tier? Moreover, the gap between them was only broadened by Nie Tiancheng's pseudo-saint tool. The 3 rank 1 king tiers being defeated wasn't surprising in the least. However, the fact that they had been defeated so quickly still caused Ling Han to feel slightly astonished. He couldn't help but take an extra glance at the peach branch. When can I dig the child tree up and move it into the Black Tower? He wanted to eat celestial peaches. Although these celestial peaches couldn't live up to their name anymore, they could only be regarded as immortal peaches. Ling Han didn't mind this. The flying rain saint would definitely howl in anger if he knew about Ling Han's thoughts. You might not mind, but I mind. That's my celestial tree. After absorbing the 3 floating rocks, Ling Han and the others rose to a height of 9 meters. Because the floating rocks had been evenly absorbed by them, they naturally couldn't shoot to the same height as if one of them had absorbed all 3 of the floating rocks. However, they didn't mind this, and they continued to snatch the floating rocks of others. After being defeated here, one wouldn't lose the right to compete. Instead, they merely needed to start over again. Thus, the fallen team of 3 immediately found another 3 floating rocks and rose into the sky. They had only just begun anyway, so their losses hadn't been big. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others came across a team of 7. This team approached them aggressively, yet their expressions changed drastically the instant that they laid their eyes on Empress Lanxing. They frantically turned around to escape, not even daring to engage in battle. Nie Tiancheng, the North Emperor, and the others were all extremely confused. What was going on? Were they already so powerful that they could scare others off with just their aura alone? However, Ling Han and his companions smiled, knowingly Empress Lanxing had the title of King-tier assassin. Although most people were only aware of her title and not her appearance, it was evident that the fleeing team of 7 did know about her looks. Moreover, it was extremely likely that they had suffered at her hands before. Thus, they had been petrified immediately upon seeing her, fleeing without even daring to engage in battle. The Empress was a rank 3 king tier. Even though her cultivation had been suppressed, she would still possess an overwhelming advantage over them. Not only that, but Ling Han's team had also reached the maximum number of 12. They continued to cruise upward. Most of the time, it was just Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi doing the hard work, each of them trying their best to impress Empress Lanxing. In fact, Shan Jingyi was also quite extraordinary, possessing a god tool that was formed from several types of rare godly stones. This god tool was only the size of a palm, yet it was incredibly heavy. When it was tossed toward an opponent, it could definitely wound their flesh and break their bones, regardless of how powerful their defenses were. It wasn't forged from saintly material, but instead composed from level 16 or so godly stones. However, after being tempered by a saint, it could be regarded as a top-notch god tool, even among the Eternal River tier. This god tool was called the 6 Elements Mountains, a name that was very similar to the 6 Mountains Saint's title. In fact, this was indeed a replica of the 6 Mountains Saint tool. Not only could it be used to smash people, but it could even expand into a mountain. When it fell, it would be able to flatten everything beneath it. Shan Jingyi and Nie Tiancheng teamed up, relying on the might of their 2 treasures to defeat anyone who dared to stand in their way. Few people could withstand their formidable power. Half a day passed, and they had already reached a height of 300 meters. However, this was only 1/10 of the way up the valley. They were still extremely far from the large boulder that was hovering above the valley. Although there was always a victor for the competition in the sunken abyss valley, no one had ever managed to reach the height of the giant boulder before. This was directly related to the quality and number of competitors. Even if there was someone who was more talented than anyone in history and peerless in the world, they would still fail to reach the giant boulder if there weren't enough competition to enable this. Only when talent was bountiful and the competition was intense would it be possible for a king among kings to emerge. This person would tread upon the heads of countless other king tiers as they gradually rose to the peak. Right now, Gu Daoyi was gazing at the giant boulder in the sky, the images of the universe and heavenly bodies flashing across his eyes. Countless great stars were born and destroyed. If Ling Han saw this, he would definitely realize that this was the power of creation and destruction. By possessing both of these powers at once, one would be able to tear apart the barrier in space and forge a path to the celestial realm. Anyhow, this wasn't strange. After all, Gu Daoyi had originally been a prodigy of the celestial realm, someone who had already surpassed the peak of the immortal level. Right now, he had been reborn with a divine fetus, and this naturally sped his cultivation up even more. Thus, he would face no barrier between cultivation levels. However, he would still be limited by his cultivation level, after all, so he couldn't genuinely wield his power of creation and destruction. Even so, there was still a faint hint of saintly might emanating from his body. It was also because of this that he was able to subdue so many king tears. Around him, there were a whopping 23 king tears standing respectfully on their floating rocks. Although the maximum number for a team was 12 people, there was nothing stopping them from forming 2 teams. The king tears all wore fervent expressions as they stood guard around Gu Dawi, and it was as if they were gazing at a god. Without him needing to move, Gu Dawi's 2 teams of guards easily disposed of any opponents in their way. In fact, there were even rank 2 king tears among his followers. When Gu Dawi saw Ling Han and the others, his gaze lingered on Empress Luan Xing for a moment longer. However, he didn't command his followers to attack them. There was no need to rush. In any case, a fresh fruit like her should be personally captured by him. Ling Han and the others rose up with surprisingly little resistance. After all, the competition had only just begun, so there were still many inferior prodigies who weren't king tears trying to test their luck. If they came across king tears, their fate would generally be sealed. As they rose higher and higher, it also became more and more difficult to find suitable opponents. With the intensity of the competition, the weaker prodigies were completely unable to rise to great heights. Whenever they reached a great height, they would be ruthlessly defeated and knocked down, again and again. Those who could maintain their positions at great heights were all genuine elites. Right now, there were almost 1,000 teams in the first echelon. Meanwhile, there were countless cultivators beneath them, all trying to fight their way up. Since the defeated cultivators could start over again, there would naturally be an endless stream of cultivators rising up for them to defeat. Of course, this was given that there was still enough time. Reaching the height of the valley signals the conclusion of the first stage. From there on up, it's forbidden to fight as a team. Moreover, according to hearsay, no one has ever been able to ascend the final 300 meters. According to the pattern of the previous competitions, when the first person or team reaches the same height as the valley, the competition of the Sunken Abyss Valley will also begin a countdown. From that point onward, the competition will only last for 3 more days. When this time expires, the person standing at the greatest height will be crowned as the winner of the competition. Anyhow, after all these years, everyone is extremely curious to find out what happens if someone manages to ascend the giant boulder at the top. Or, in other words, everyone is curious to see whether they'll receive some never-before-seen reward. It's a pity that no one had ever succeeded before. The North Emperor and Stone Emperor spoke in an alternating manner again. They had already reached a height of 2,400 meters, and this was already not far from the peak of the valley. This also signified that their alliance was about to come to an end. "Someone's coming," Nia Tiancheng suddenly exclaimed. He gazed forward, killing intent oozing from his body. Ling Han glanced over, yet he immediately reached over to stop Nia Tiancheng from attacking. "Those are my friends." This was a team of 5 people, for of whom Ling Han recognized Faceless, Yang Lin, Yu Ying, and the Cloud Maiden. "Brother Ling!" The 4 people immediately called in greeting. Ling Han nodded in reply before starting to greet them one by one. In fact, their team of 5 wasn't especially powerful. However, they had Yang Lin on their team. This was someone with the title of Heaven's Blessed Child. Indeed, Yang Lin was someone who could casually find a saint tool when wandering around. Thus, they had generally only come across weaker cultivators on their ascent to this height. In other words, they had actually managed to reach this height without much difficulty. Ling Han felt that they should stop ascending after reaching a height of 3,000 meters. Firstly, they could maintain their power as a team, looking out for and protecting each other. Secondly, they could avoid coming across any top-notch king tier. When the time limit of 3 days was about to expire, they could then make the jump to the second stage, thereby gaining the right to receive the blessings of heaven and earth. In any case, the floating rocks only had a movement range of 6 meters in the up and down direction. Thus, they could easily achieve this goal if they calculated their positions carefully. Chapter 1446, Questioning. Chapter 1446, Questioning. Nie Tiancheng was extremely pissed off. Ling Han actually dared to block him? Holy fuck. They were here to fight for a great opportunity, not to catch up with old friends. There was an icy look in his eyes, yet upon recalling their plan, he forcefully suppressed his urge to explode in anger after reaching the height of the valley. He and Shanjingyi would launch a surprise attack and knock him off his floating rock. They would make him fall from heaven to hell. That would definitely be a feeling of unparalleled despair for Ling Han. "Brother Ling, we'll spar later," Faceless said with a smile. Ever since growing a face, his expressions had also started to become increasingly rich and lively. "Sure," Ling Han said with a nod. Only after chattering for a while did Yan Lin and the others hover away on their floating rocks. Because they had all fought hard to reach this height, and because the teams at this height were all extremely powerful, no one was willing to rashly engage in battle with others. In fact, even Gu Daoyi wouldn't dare to say that he could crush all of the elites at this height. Since their cultivation had been suppressed to the same level, the gap in power between them was also far too small. Those who dared to make an enemy of everyone would definitely be knocked down the quickest. However, there were also exceptions. More precisely, there was a dog that was an exception to this rule. The large black dog had also appeared, and he obviously hadn't formed a team with anyone who dared to form a team with him, to say nothing of being bitten in the rear by this dog. Just the hostile stares from the tens of thousands of cultivators would be enough to pressure anyone to death. However, the battle style of the large black dog was surprisingly simple. He would simply crash into his opponents, this crash sure to knock his opponents off their floating rock. It was because of the large black dog's powerful physique and near immunity to origin power that he was able to take to this competition like fish took to water. Yet his mouth was still as toxic as always. So be it if he defeated his opponents. However, he would still insist on biting and even mocking them, causing all of his opponents to explode in anger as they fell to the bottom of the valley. If they could fly up this valley, there would definitely be tens of thousands of people chasing after the large black dog at this moment. Sigh, my life is truly as lonely as fallen snow. It's truly cold at this great height. Grandpa Dog genuinely feels sorry for being so powerful. The large black dog was standing upright on his floating rock as he pretended to be the most powerful being in the world. "Those people above, Grandpa Dog is coming. Come and become Grandpa Dog's human servants." His utterances instantly offended everyone in the valley. In fact, even Gu Daoyi narrowed his eyes and moved his gaze away from Empress Luanxing, stealing a few extra glances at the large black dog. He had lived 9 previous lives, and although each of these lives had only been very short apart from the first, these lives had still lasted for at least 1 million years. Yet, during these millions of years, he had never discovered anything special about the large black dog. After reincarnating into his 10th life, it was as if the large black dog had also obtained some great opportunity. This was so peculiar that even he was slightly astonished. However, this dog was an absolute C*NT. Gu Daoyi would never allow a dog as depraved as this to follow him. He was someone who had the goal of breaking into the celestial realm and obtaining unparalleled power. If there were a dog continuously provoking the people around him, it would be a genuine miracle if he wasn't killed after a very short amount of time. After all, he wouldn't be an elite after entering the celestial realm anymore. Moreover, even though his divine fetus was extraordinary, just how powerful was the celestial realm? There would definitely be powerful physiques that could rival the incredible might of his divine fetus. As such, his physique could only be regarded as one of the most powerful, not the most powerful. Ignore that dog. Let us make haste and charge to the peak, Gudawi said. He cast his gaze to the giant golden boulder hovering in the sky. He had a feeling that if he could ascend this boulder, he would definitely obtain immeasurable benefits. To instill such a feeling in him, someone who was once a celestial, this boulder was definitely a goal that he had to reach. After a temporary moment of peace, intense battles immediately started to flare up again. A team of 12 aggressively charged toward Ling Han and the others, directly attacking them without even speaking a word. Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi charged over to meet them. However, they were unable to suppress these people even after summoning their powerful weapons. Instead, they were the ones being ruthlessly suppressed. After all, their opponents were also extremely powerful, and they also had a huge advantage in numbers. This team of 12 wasn't a team that the two of them could deal with alone. The North Emperor and the Stone Emperor hurriedly rushed over to help. Even so, they were still unable to turn their disadvantage into an advantage. The Rain Emperor was itching to fight, so he roared loudly before also joining into the battle. Seeing the eager expressions on his two disciples' faces, Ling Han grinned before nodding in approval. Seeing this, Ding Ping and Jiao also charged over to join the battle. Ding Ping represented pure power, and no one at the same cultivation level as him would be able to rival his strength. He launched a punch, and the dense power packed into this punch was at least 1 star more powerful than even rank 3 king tiers. Meanwhile, Jiao was someone who had taken a path of peculiarity. The 9 divine patterns on his arms lit up, transforming into 9 powerful demonic beasts that were each just as powerful as him. When the 10 of them teamed up, it was equivalent to Jiao gaining an extra star of battle prowess. At a glance, this didn't appear as powerful as Ding Ping. However, these 9 demonic beasts were all undying beings. Moreover, Jiao's body could also transform into a mist-like state, his powerful defensive ability not something that Ding Ping could rival. Thus, when trying to determine which of them was stronger, this wasn't something that could be concluded from their power or cultivation level alone. However, when it came to the battles in the Sunken Abyss Valley, it was quite evident that the more powerful one's offensive ability, the greater their advantage. This was so because it would be extremely difficult to defend the floating rock beneath one's feet, regardless of how impressive one's defensive ability. Take, for example, Ling Han. He could stand there and allow every single king tier in this abyss to attack him. Even in the face of such attacks, he could guarantee that he wouldn't receive an iota of damage. However, he couldn't guarantee that the floating rock beneath his feet would also remain unscathed. The Rain Emperor was cultivating a path of dominance, so he hadn't even considered targeting the floating rocks beneath his opponent's feet. Instead, he simply attacked the cultivators. Once he defeated them, the floating rocks beneath their feet would naturally become his. This was obviously several times more difficult than just targeting the floating rocks. However, this was just how willful the Rain Emperor was. This greatly displeased Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi. However, they had their hands full right now, so they didn't have any spare time or energy to express their displeasure. After a while, Su Ran and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden also joined the battle. Meanwhile, taking into account his identity, the notionless saint didn't participate in the battle. After all, it was naturally beneath him to skirmish with these juniors. Beside him, Ling Han and Empress Luan Xing commanded the battle. If anyone was facing danger, they could also rush over to help. In any case, this was already sufficient. Although they were still at a disadvantage in terms of numbers, they were already more powerful than their opponents. The Rain Emperor was the first to achieve victory, blasting his opponent off his floating rock. Once this breach was opened, their remaining opponents started to fall like dominoes, either being knocked off their floating rock or having their floating rock shattered. However, even after defeating these powerful opponents, they only managed to rise by 9 meters. From this, it could be seen just how difficult it would be to cover the last 300 meters of the second stage. Not only did they have to defeat a few dozen people, but these would all be extremely powerful opponents. After all, these opponents would also be people who had crawled up by stepping on the corpses of others. Although the defeated cultivators could continue to rise up, there was only a mere 3 days of time. Thus, to reach the gigantic boulder in the sky would be a tremendously difficult task. In the countless years of this competition, no one had ever managed to ascend that gigantic golden boulder. This was a testimony of the immense difficulty of the task. "Humph! How arrogant of you two. The others all participated in the battle. So why did you two stay behind to watch?" After the battle, Nia Tiancheng immediately started to vent his anger on Ling Han and the Notionless Saint. Ding Ping and Jiu Yao immediately stepped forward, blocking Ling Han behind them. There was a menacing glint in their eyes as they faced off against Nia Tiancheng. Firstly, the battle has already been won. Secondly, does our master need to personally partake in such a battle? They asked in a haughty manner. Nia Tiancheng almost exploded in anger. Ling Han was far too arrogant. He was actually using his 2 disciples to deal with him. However, he could clearly tell that both of these disciples had only just advanced to the heaven body tier. In the outside world, he could easily suppress them using just a single hand. Here, however, even with his pseudo-saint tool, he still didn't have absolute confidence that he could defeat them. After all, he had witnessed their battle prowess just then. If he battled against them 2-on-1, he genuinely didn't have any confidence that he could win. Chapter 1447. Conclusion of the First Stage. Chapter 1447. Conclusion of the First Stage. Shan Jingyi arrived beside Nia Tiancheng at this moment, saying, "Couldn't we have ended the battle earlier if we all attacked at once? Don't forget, we're a team. The most important thing is the overall benefit of the team." Ding Ping and Jiu Yao wanted to retort him, yet Ling Han tapped their shoulders, saying, "Fine, we'll fight with the overall benefit of the team in mind next time. I'll also participate in the battle." Shan Jingyi and Nia Tiancheng exchanged a glance, delight in their eyes because of the imminent success of their plan. They wanted to target Ling Han, so they naturally needed to understand Ling Han's strength first. After all, one could only ascertain victory if they understood their opponent. Moreover, since his 2 disciples were already so powerful, could Ling Han be any weaker than them? Shan Jingyi and Nia Tiancheng didn't want to dig themselves into a hole. If Ling Han were too powerful, they would choose to bide their time first. Ling Han smiled faintly. He could easily guess the thoughts of Shan Jingyi and Nia Tiancheng. When they came across another team, Ling Han indeed participated in the battle. He casually snapped his fingers, sending a wave of sword chi toward his opponents. This could be viewed as a relatively powerful technique. However, in terms of extraordinary qualities, Ling Han didn't seem to show any. The Notionless Saint couldn't suppress his itch, so he also participated in the battle. However, he didn't unleash his saintly aura. This was his trump card, so he definitely wouldn't use it until the most critical moments. Only Empress Luanxing didn't participate in any of the battles. However, she was a charming beauty they all adored and admired, so who would step forward to criticize her? 2,400 meters, 2,700 meters, 2,970 meters. At this height, there were already very few teams, remaining only 100 or so. Although there were only 30 meters remaining to the peak of the valley, theoretically speaking, only 5 to 6 of the teams would be able to ascend to this height during this round of battles. Everyone became even more alert and serious. Each of these 100 or so teams had risen up after defeating countless other teams. As such, which of these teams wasn't extremely powerful? If they were defeated by an even more powerful opponent, they would fall back down to the bottom of the valley. At that time, they would have to battle their way up again. Die. After a short pause, chaotic battles instantly broke out between the teams again. Meanwhile, Ling Han and the others finally came across a powerful opponent. Without Empress Luanxing participating, and without Ling Han unleashing his full power, the skirmish between their teams lasted for several long hours before a victor was finally determined. They had defeated their opponents. Ling Han's team rose several more meters. However, glancing into the distance, Gu Daoi's two teams had already risen by many more meters. This was a sign of their overwhelming battle prowess. Meanwhile, at this moment, the teams of the Supreme King tiers finally separated themselves from the remaining king tiers. "Zi Chanfeng!" the North Emperor exclaimed as he gazed at a team of 7 in the distance. Among this team, there was a young man who surprisingly had flowing purple hair. There was also a pair of horns on his head, though it was difficult to tell what kind of horns these were. In any case, these horns didn't affect his handsomeness in the least. I battled against him several thousand years ago. However, I was defeated in a single strike. Ling Han nodded upon hearing this, saying, "He's reached the pinnacle level of the heavenly body tier." If they were at the same cultivation level, no one could defeat the North Emperor in a single strike. "Long Xiangyue," Nia Tiancheng exclaimed as he gazed at another location. His pupils contracted, and cold sweat surprisingly started to drip from his forehead. That was a woman who possessed an incredibly attractive figure. She was dressed in a suit of golden scale armor and also wearing a helmet that was decorated with dragons. Her luscious hair was tied into a bun inside this helmet, and even from this distance, they could feel the might and vigor radiating from her. She was more so exuding an astonishing vitality and liveliness. It was as if she were a true dragon in human form. Truly, her aura was far too astounding. Moreover, she was alone with her sword. She hadn't formed a team, nor did she have any followers. Her demeanor was one of independence and strength. "Second in the world," Shan Jingyi exclaimed in astonishment. This was another rank 3 king tier who was standing at the peak of the current generation of prodigies. Ling Han glanced over. Second in the world definitely couldn't be regarded as a handsome man. However, he was extremely large in stature, being at least a head taller than most other people. He was sturdily built, and his skin was a tanned copper color. His arm was dense with hair, and his face was more so covered by a thick beard. At a glance, he genuinely looked like a powerful bear standing on its hind legs. Judging by appearance alone, this person didn't look anything like a powerful king tier. He looked neither ethereal nor full of wisdom and vigor. If he were placed on some random street, anyone would think that he was the thug of the town. However, contrary to expectations, it was someone like this who was a supreme king tier. The name second in the world was enough to explain everything. Second in the world wasn't alone, there was a team of people behind him. Unexpectedly, this was a team of elegant and graceful women. Moreover, they were all as beautiful as flowers. This was a jarring sight, and they didn't seem to fit together with second in the world at all. To say nothing of beautiful flowers being placed with cow dung, this was still at least a case of beauties and a beast. "Why isn't Empress Luanxing here?" the Stone Emperor murmured to himself. He hadn't seen Empress Luanxing before, and Ling Han and the others hadn't introduced her to him either. Thus, he was still looking around in search of her. However, he couldn't find anyone who fitted the descriptions of the rumors. The North Emperor and Nia Tiancheng were also searching for her. However, like the Stone Emperor, they were also completely baffled. Little did they realize that Empress Luanxing had been beside them this entire time. Xiao, Long Xiangyue, was the first to move, charging toward a team of 12. Once she defeated them, she would obtain 12 floating rocks and immediately rise to the peak. Humph. So what if you're a rank 3 king tier? You're by yourself, so there's no chance that you'll win. The team of 12 immediately started to counterattack. They were all rank 2 king tiers, and they all possessed extremely powerful weapons. In fact, some of their weapons were no less valuable than Nie Tiancheng's celestial peach branch or Shan Jingyi's replica Six Elements mountains. Long Xiangyue slashed with her sword. This strike had a celestial's elegance, exuding a profoundly ethereal aura. Moreover, she was incredibly domineering, directly charging at them head-on. Her suit of scale armor started to glow, and it was as if her helmet had also become alive. It transformed into a genuine dragon head, unleashing a tremendous dragon might as it roared. Even the supreme king tiers could feel the boundless pressure exuding from this roar. True dragons, once they matured, they would already be Genesis tier saints. They possessed the most powerful bloodline in the immortal realm. With just her sword, Long Xiangyue was still tremendously powerful, her relentless attacks quickly causing her opponents to become wounded and disheveled. With an overwhelming might, she forcefully snatched the 12 floating rocks of her opponents. She then immediately rose upward, becoming the first person to reach the peak of the valley. The image of an hourglass instantly materialized on the gigantic golden boulder hovering above the valley. Moreover, the sand within it had already started to flow. Someone had finally broken through the first stage and charged into the second stage. However, Long Xiangyue was unable to rise any higher. This was because there was no one else at the same level as her. Even if she lowered her position by 6 meters and the others raised theirs by 6, that would still only make up 12 of the many meters between them. She could only wait. Meanwhile, the other teams also started to do battle. The countdown had already begun, so they could no longer take things slowly and steadily. Among the king tiers who had come here, who didn't yearn to ascend the giant golden boulder at the peak. Charge! After a series of intense battles, the teams that possessed Supreme King tiers all started to rise steadily, breaking through to the second stage one after another. Upon reaching this stage, each team would naturally disband. The cultivators could also see that as long as 2 people were together, the floating rocks beneath them would automatically begin to crumble. If they didn't engage in battle, their only fate would be to die together. That being the case, teaming up would be a near impossible task. Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi exchanged a glance before both of them suddenly lashed out, striking at the floating rock beneath Ling Han's feet. It was for this moment that they had endured him for so long. They were already impatient to see the astonishment and shock on Ling Han's face. That would definitely be a beautiful sight to behold. However, Ling Han suddenly turned around, a strange smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Chapter 1448 10 Powerful King Tiers. Chapter 1448 10 Powerful King Tiers. Nie Tiancheng's and Shan Jingyi's heart jolted. They had both launched a surprise attack, so, logically speaking, Ling Han certainly shouldn't have been able to predict their attacks beforehand. Yet, in reality, Ling Han was composed and unflustered. Not only that, but he had even cracked a strange smile at them. This meant that he had already been wary of them for a long time. Good one, brat. As a member of the team, you were actually suspicious of your team members. It truly was absurd that this was the thought running through their minds. Perhaps they should have reflected on the fact that it was they who were attacking Ling Han right now. Ling Han's smile grew even wider as he swung both of his fists at once. Whoa! A terrifying might swept outward, and the power of Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi was forcefully suppressed by 2 stars. 2 stars! What kind of concept was this? They were all at the low extreme of the heavenly body tier, and they were all rank 2 king tiers. Thus, even if there were discrepancies in their power, it would have only been extremely minimal. Right now, however, the power of Nie Tiancheng and Shan Jingyi had been suppressed by 2 entire stars. This was a drop of 100-fold. How could they still oppose Ling Han? Pung, pung. They were instantly blasted off their respective floating rocks. screaming in agony as they flew through the air. However, this still wasn't the end. Empress Luanxing also lashed out, two large mountains materializing as she made a slapping motion with her hand. Boom! These mountains ruthlessly slammed into Nia, Tiancheng, and Shangjingi. Papa! Blood instantly exploded from their bodies, the sound of breaking bones grating yet unending. In fact, this strike had broken all of the bones in their bodies. If Ling Han hadn't attacked them, or if he hadn't suppressed their power by 2 stars, their situation wouldn't have been so dire. Even if they were no match for a rank 3 king tier, it would have still been impossible for a rank 3 king tier to severely wound them with a single strike. Just then, however, Ling Han and Empress Luanxing had essentially teamed up to attack them. How many people in the world could withstand their devastating attacks? At least, it was clear that Nia Tiancheng and Shang Jingyi couldn't. They continued to wail in agony as they plummeted to the floor of the valley. Ling Han blasting them off their floating rocks had only caused them some minor injuries. However, Empress Luanxing's follow-up strike had genuinely left them with severe wounds. These wounds weren't severe enough to kill them, yet they were severe enough to ensure that they wouldn't be able to battle at full strength for at least several hundred years. Gazing at the proud and mighty Empress Luanxing as they fell, they suddenly came to a realization. Isn't she the king-tier assassin? Sure enough, they had been mercilessly defeated. There were indescribable emotions churning in their minds at this moment. However, their envy and jealousy of Ling Han grew several-fold. After leaving this valley, they would definitely have their revenge on Ling Han. He had actually dared to lull them into a trap. Right now, 50 or so king tiers had already entered the second stage of the competition. At this height, it was already impossible to form any alliances. Each person could only fight for themselves. If they didn't want to battle against someone, the most they could do was avoid them or keep their distance. Ling Han and his companions also spread apart. After all, they naturally wouldn't step on the corpses of their friends to rise to the top. By spreading apart, they could avoid being forced into battle against each other. This would obviously result in some of them being defeated, but there was nothing more they could do about this. This was also the case for everyone else, with all the king tiers fighting their own battles after reaching the second stage. It was impossible to team up, and each person could only rely on their own abilities. In fact, this also rendered the competition more fair. Ling Han started to unleash his power as he engaged in battle. He didn't unleash his full power, though, merely unleashing heaven's might to suppress the power of his opponents. However, in a competition such as this, the effect of heaven's might was incredibly devastating. It could almost be regarded as one of the most powerful weapons. Everyone's power was the same, yet if someone came across Ling Han, their power would be suppressed 100-fold. That being the case, how could they still rival him? Ling Han was as good as invincible as he defeated numerous opponents and continued to rise higher and higher. Meanwhile, less and less people could stay at the same height as him. It wasn't long before there were only 10 of them at the same height. There was Empress Luanxing, the Rain Emperor, the Notionless Saint, Zi Qinfeng, Long Shangyue, second in the world, Gu Daoi, and Ling Han. Meanwhile, the last 2 individuals were complete strangers to Ling Han. However, like Ling Han, they had both been extremely low-key in the beginning. Only after entering the second stage did they suddenly transform into powerful individuals who obliterated anyone who stood in their way. The North Emperor and Stone Emperor hadn't been defeated yet, but a significant gap had already formed between them and the first echelon. As for Ding Ping, Zhu Yao, Su Ran, and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden, they had also fallen into this second echelon of king tiers. Below them, there were still many more cultivators fighting and surging up. These were the cultivators who had been defeated after occupying spots in second and third echelons before. Right now, they were fighting their way up again. This is incredible. I've heard that those four are all from the same galaxy, someone said as they pointed at Ling Han, Empress Luanxing, the Rain Emperor, and the Notionless Saint. They then pointed at the Heavenly Phoenix, Divine Maiden, and the others, and said, "They're also from that same galaxy." A single galaxy produced 8 king tiers, all of whom are this powerful? Good heavens! The spectators at the bottom of the valley all clasped their heads in shock and surprise. This was an astounding revelation. A small galaxy had actually produced this many top-notch king tiers? How could those from the large and super-large galaxies accept this? However, the following battles will be what determines the final victor. I reckon Gu Daoyi has the best chance of winning. I've heard that his talent is unparalleled throughout both the past and the present. I agree. He's the only king tier who's been able to recruit fellow king tiers as followers. This is a clear sign that his strength is far superior to the other king tiers. I support Empress Luanxing. There's no reason for this, other than that I like her. I also support Empress Luanxing. Huh. Who are the other 2 people? I don't think I've ever seen them before. Ha! That's because you're uninformed. The person in gray is called Hongma, and he's the disciple of the Sky Ancient Saint. Moreover, he's a rank 3 king tier. What? Another rank 3 king tier. The person in blue is a lone cultivator, yet his fortune is astonishing, and he's come across countless rare opportunities in his time. His name is Cheng Xiaofan, and he's also a rank 3 king tier. Cheng Xiaofan isn't ordinary at all. Anyhow, I still think that Gu Daoyi is going to win. He's a prodigy who was born in accordance with the great trend of heaven and earth. So he's destined to become a brilliant prodigy whose dazzling radiance illuminates past, present, and future. Indeed, more and more people started to lean toward the opinion that Gu Daoyi would be the eventual victor. This was an extraordinary king tier who possessed an aura that resonated with the rhythm of Tao. Moreover, among the 10 most powerful king tiers, he was clearly the most eye-catching one. It was as if he were a sun, while the others could only scrape by as the stars that orbited him. The gulf between them appeared far too large to overcome. Above the valley, Gu Daoyi stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He smiled as he looked at Ling Han, saying in an incredibly haughty voice, "I never imagined that you would be powerful enough to reach this stage and even dare to oppose me." Ling Han naturally wouldn't back down, retorting, "You've merely come out of hiding after tens of thousands of years. Why would I be afraid of you?" Huh. Gu Daoyi couldn't help but chuckle, saying, "Prodigies have no option but to bow their heads before me. In fact, even king tiers are nothing more than dirt. Wherever I pass, all beings will have to prostrate." Boom! Before he could even finish speaking, a brilliant sword light had already slashed toward him. Ling Han brandished his sword, saying, "Prostrate your mom. Come, battle me. I'll teach you how to become a decent human." Gu Daoyi couldn't help but grimace. Back then, Ling Han had provoked him with a few words, arousing his pride and resulting in his decision to let Ling Han go. After all, this was the first person that he had spoken to in hundreds of millions of years. Indeed, that had been quite a meaningful event for him. He wanted Ling Han to witness his rise to glory. However, he would have never imagined that Ling Han actually possessed such a toxic togue, one almost as toxic as that of the large black dog. However, Ling Han's strike was already before him, so he had no option but to engage. He struck using his palm. Pum! The sword light collided with his palm strike. Boom! The sword light was instantly shattered, transforming into a devastating shock wave that caused all of the surrounding floating rocks to sway violently as if they were ships out in the tumultuous sea. When this shock wave passed, the spectators could see that Ling Han was facing off against Gu Daoyi, raging fighting spirit on their faces. "I've truly underestimated you," Gu Daoyi said softly. "However, before me, All prodigies are nothing but tra. Schwa. His words were cut off by another strike from Ling Han. Fuck. Is there any end to this? Even if you want to fight, at least let me finish speaking first, okay? Chapter 1449, Fighting Gu Daoyi. Chapter 1449, Fighting Gu Daoyi. Gu Daoyi was furious. He'd initially been a prodigy of the celestial realm. Though he had now fallen to the immortal realm, he still had a very high opinion of himself and had a very powerful superiority complex. In his eyes, the immortal realm was a backward, primitive place. This feeling of superiority was just like how the prodigies of the immortal realm felt towards the cultivators that came from a small world. And now, an ant of the lower realm actually provoked him repeatedly. It was like a mortal challenging the might of the heavens. So how could he not be enraged? Erase. He humphed, an air of primal chaos encircling his whole body. There were images of heavenly bodies appearing behind him, and he stood proudly like a god, as if he could shatter a star with a single stamp of his foot. Ignorant ant, you actually dare challenge my authority! He stretched out his hand and tapped out a finger. A frightening power of regulations was condensed in his origin power, which took the form of a finger. But this finger was a 300-meter long and 90-meter wide one, and it grandly pressed down on Ling Han. One after another, divine patterns appeared on this colossal finger, exuding an aura that had completely surpassed the level of the low extreme and the medium extreme, and had even reached the level of the high extreme of the heavenly body tier. It should be known that all of their cultivation levels had been weakened to the early stage of the low extreme, but the might of this attack of his had reached the high extreme. How many stars of battle prowess had he surpassed? When this strike was unleashed, everyone was astounded. How could he possibly be so powerful? From the early stage of the low extreme to the high extreme, even if it was similarly the early stage, that had also breached a gap of a whole 8 stars of battle prowess, this was something that should not have happened, unless it was being suppressed by the pinnacle level. But how could that be possible now? This was exactly who Gu Daoyi was, the greatest prodigy for all eternity. How could Ling Han block that? Even if Ling Han managed to block it, how could the floating rock beneath his feet be saved? There was absolutely no way to resolve this attack. Everyone shook their heads. Being able to enter into the first team, these 10 people were all undoubtedly kings among kings. But compared to Gu Daoyi, they would pale in comparison. They were on completely different levels. He's finished. If he doesn't want to die, he can only give up the floating rock beneath his feet, or there would be nowhere he could dodge to. Who asked him to be so determined to challenge Gu Daoyi? If he'd kept a low profile and drawn out the distance between himself and Gu Daoyi, even if he could not have ascended to the top, he would have at least been able to get a place that is closer to the top. It was Gu Daoyi who provoked him first, right? What kind of person is Gu Daoyi? He is naturally qualified to be arrogant. If Ling Han had more self-awareness, he should choose submission and not a head-on confrontation. So this is what he asked for. He has to start again from the beginning. A considerable number were making cynical remarks. They were communicating through their divine sense. This could be done very quickly. Otherwise, Gu Daoyi's attack would have reached them in the time they'd taken to open their mouths. But Ling Han's actions caused everyone to be surprised. That was because he did not save himself by jumping off the floating rock. Instead, he raised his hand and pressed down on that giant finger. He's fucking crazy. Seeing this scene, this thought appeared in everyone's heads. This was absolutely not something the low extreme of the heavenly body tier could press down on. If he took it on by force, that was courting death. A great many people were shaking their heads. Ling Han was really too foolish. He was actually showing off his courage at such a time. This was not merely an attempt to seek death anymore. He would be killed by his own foolishness. Boom! That attack of Ling Han, which seemed like a speck of dust, met the colossal finger, and it was visible that the giant finger was beginning to deteriorate at an astonishing pace. When it truly reached Ling Han's body, it had already collapsed on its own. What? Seeing this scene, everyone's mouths were gaping. They were rendered completely speechless. Previously they had said that Gu Daoi's attack was definitely not something that could be matched by anyone in the low extreme of the heavenly body tier. But just in the blink of an eye, Ling Han had used reality to slap their words back into their faces. He had easily dispersed the attack. So many years had passed, and Ling Han had continued to cultivate underneath the reincarnation tree. He had also drunk who knew how much reincarnation tea, and had boosted his mastery of the tide of the ages to a well-practiced extent. Even without the bloodline of the Ding clan, he had definitely surpassed a great majority of the members of the Ding clan in terms of his use of tide of the ages. Gu Dawei also looked surprised. Though this finger had not been comprised of his full power, who was he? He was a prodigy of the celestial realm, and now he was also a divine fetus that had been produced from his 9 lives. The strength of his battle prowess should be invincible among his peers in the immortal realm. This is the power of time. He carefully recollected, and the look of surprise on his face involuntarily became even stronger. Though Ling Han's mastery of the power of time could only be considered superficial, an ant of the lower realm was actually capable of touching the height of the regulations of time. This was inconceivable in his eyes. Even in the celestial realm, aside from the inheritance of bloodline, only those that had advanced into the severing mundane were qualified to touch this kind of supremely high regulations. Could it be that Ling Han possessed the bloodline of the celestial realm and had been expelled from the celestial realm just like him? That's right. Otherwise, how could he possibly know of the existence of the celestial realm? No wonder he dared to oppose him. As it turned out, he was also from the celestial realm. Humph! You just have a slightly superficial grasp of the power of time, and you dare think you can stop me? Gu Dawei asked maliciously, disdain clear on his face, but a feeling of vigilance rose up in his heart. The power of time was extraordinary. In a battle between equals, he had to show his true abilities. Ling Han smiled calmly and said, "You've been asleep for several billion years, and you really have a lot of nonsense to spout." Gu Dawei's expression darkened involuntarily. He really had a vicious tongue. He had cultivated to his 10th lifetime, so his way of thinking had also become young, and he was also more easily provoked. His eyes narrowed involuntarily, and his killing intent soared. "You are so determined to seek your own death." He maneuvered the floating rock and charged towards Ling Han. He tapped out another finger, the tip of his finger as bright as blood and incredibly blinding. God of blood finger! Ling Han still did the same thing and sent out another tide of the ages. However, he immediately discovered that the might of the other's attack was incredibly dense, just as if it was a mountain that had been condensed into the size of an egg. Thus, the surface area that was being affected by the tide of the ages had also become very, very small. Hence, when this finger was endlessly having its outer shell peeled off until there was only a small point left behind, the might of the tide of the ages had also completely vanished. Yet this tiny point was bursting with the most frightening, destructive power. Boom! This attack landed on Ling Han's body and forced him backwards a few thousand meters. But when he arrived at the boundary of the valley, his figure stopped. An invisible barrier had stopped his retreat. Gu Dawei revealed an expression of pride. Did he think that he had no way to deal with this superficial level power of time? What a joke! He had grasped who knew how many powerful secret techniques, and they were all celestial realm level, so his support base was unimaginable strong. But in the next instant, the arrogance on his face suddenly transformed into surprise. That was because Ling Han had moved about his bones and muscles, looking like he had not been harmed in the slightest. If this attack had been aimed directly at the floating rock beneath his feet, Ling Han would definitely have fallen. But as it was an attack aimed at him, then sorry, how could power on the level of low extreme possibly cause him serious injury? Even if it was a technique from the celestial realm, it was still impossible. That was because the indestructible Heaven's Scroll had similarly originated from the celestial realm, and its level was even higher. Chapter 1450, Saber of Heaven S-Will. Chapter 1450, Saber of Heaven S-Will. Gu Dawi was indescribably stunned. The god of Bloodfinger was an ultimate technique he had cultivated in his second lifetime. Used as an attack, with Ling Han's superficial mastery of the power of time, it was absolutely impossible for him to dispel the attack. This was indeed as he had expected, but could it be that this guy's body was forged from divine metal? Even Gu Dawi could not imagine how there could possibly be such a freakish physique in this world, causing him to involuntarily be stirred up emotionally and pale. Fuck, I must have seen it wrong, right? That brat suffered such a terrifying attack from Gu Dawi, and he didn't even have the slightest scratch on him. No, he has still been wounded. Bullsh**T, that's only a little bleeding from the corner of his mouth. Can that also be considered a wound? The masses below were all grabbing their heads. Gu Dawi couldn't cause him serious injury, even when he used a supreme technique. What level had Ling Han's physique reached? Ling Han wiped away the trace of blood at the corner of his lips. He was Gu Dawi after all. Even if his cultivation level had been reduced, this attack had still induced a certain amount of damage to him. After all, the toughness of his physique had also been weakened along with his cultivation level. But this kind of wound was completely nothing. With a flick of his finger, innumerable flashes of sword chi danced and struck out at Gu Dawi. Lightning sword technique. Shwa, shwa, shwa. Every flash of sword chi was incredibly and extraordinarily fast, and they caused Gu Dawi to suddenly cut a sorry figure. He parried endlessly, but after these flashes of sword chi dispersed, multiple rips had appeared on his clothing as well. Some of his hair had also been cut, and there was even a wound on his cheek from which blood was seeping. Gu Dawi had also been injured. Seeing this scene, everyone couldn't help but gasp, and Gu Dawi's followers were incredibly furious. They wanted nothing more than to fly up into the air and grind Ling Han into dust. In their hearts, Gu Dawi was a god that could only be worshipped. That was Gu Dawi, the person who was acclaimed to be strongest prodigy for all eternity, but now in a situation when their cultivation levels were completely equal, he had actually sustained an injury. You attacked, and I countered, neither willing to take a loss. Gasp, Ling Han was also very strong. At this moment, there was finally a number of people that leant towards Ling Han. Even if they did not think that he could win, he was qualified to oppose Gu Dawi at least, and was the strongest king tier of the present younger generation. Gu Dawi wiped his cheek. His blood congealed and did not change. Each drop was like a bead. He looked at the trace of blood on his hand, his expression becoming colder and colder. He had recultivated 8 lifetimes when he had fallen from the celestial realm into this immortal realm. He had successfully reached the peak of Genesis tier in every lifetime, and had not suffered the slightest setback. How many years had it been since the last time he had been injured? He had buried his body of 9 lifetimes, and only became a divine fetus in his 10th lifetime. Furthermore, he was cultivating a cultivation technique of the celestial realm. So no matter how he thought about it, he should have been invincible among his peers. Even in the celestial realm, he was still confident that only prodigies of the same cultivation level could match him at most. But if it was a matter of defeating him, that was an absolute impossibility. But as it happened, in this immortal realm that he thought of as a primitive plane, there appeared a person who could match him, and the other party had not even cultivated to his 3rd pinnacle level. In theory, in terms of power and the use of regulations, the latter was slightly less skilled than himself. Then didn't that completely mean that he would lose in a battle between equals? No. Gu Dawi looked once more at Ling Han and communicated through his divine sense. I used my body of 9 lifetimes to cultivate the divine fetus of my 10th lifetime. I cultivated supreme, mystical powers in every lifetime. How many mystical powers from how many lifetimes would you be capable of blocking? Bring it on. Ling Han laughed loudly. His hands flourished, and one after another, flashes of sword chi shot out and sliced towards Gu Daoyi. He was also very conceited. Since Gu Daoyi was not using any weapons, he also put the divine demon's sword away. Heavens will saber! Gu Daoyi's expression suddenly became serious, his whole person exuding a cold saber intent, as if he himself had become a supreme divine saber that could slash apart all in existence. Ling Han's face bore a smile, but a powerful feeling of alertness rose up in his heart. Those like Empress Luan Xing and Faceless, if they were traced back to their origins, were all related to the celestial realm. They were descendants of elites from the celestial realm, and the blood of the celestial realm flowed in their bodies, so they could use the techniques of the celestial realm. But compared to Gu Daoyi, they were still far too inferior. He himself was an elite of the celestial realm. He had only buried himself and lived one lifetime after another. With every lifetime, he would change his bloodline once and cultivate a new mystical power. Though Ling Han was not sure about the theory, it was likely related to the 9 Deaths Heaven art. This was a living elite of the celestial realm. He had only had his cultivation level weakened, but his foundations were even deeper, and his constitution was incredibly strong. The secret techniques that he used definitely could not be underestimated. The truth was indeed so as well. A supreme divine saber appeared above Gu Daoyi's head. It was 30,000 meters long and as black as ink. The mere sight of it would cause one's heart and soul to tremble, as if their spirit itself would be plucked out of their body. Gu Daoyi's heavens will saber meant that when the heavens delivered a saber strike on you, the damage was not done to the physical body, but rather to your spirit. All life fades. Gu Daoyi pointed a finger at Ling Han. Shua. The divine saber slashed over, representing the great Tao of heaven and earth, and could not be blocked by anything in existence. Ling Han used the Tide of the Ages, but in a clash of celestial techniques, the Tide of the Ages was not able to produce much effect. This divine saber had only been weakened by 30%, and was still slashing down at him with its massive aura and might. This was very normal. Celestial techniques were invincible in the immortal realm, but in the celestial realm, there definitely would be innumerable ways of opposing them. Otherwise, wouldn't the Ding clan have been able to conquer and rule over the whole celestial realm? Boom, the saber struck down, and inconceivably, the saber's blade that was still over 20,000 meters long actually sliced into Ling Han's body, and then disappeared without a trace. This was not a material attack, but rather divine intent. It was naturally formless, and the damage was directly dealt to the spirit. Ha! Gu Daoyi laughed loudly. After being slashed by the heavens will saber, it was natural that not the slightest bit would be left of his spirit, as it would all be destroyed. From now onwards, there would no longer be a person called Ling Han in this world. He felt a slight pity. In his eyes, Ling Han should also be from the celestial realm. Even if he had not come directly from the celestial realm like himself, he should at least be a descendant of those that had been expelled from the celestial realm those years ago, and they could be claimed to share the same roots. If possible, he actually wanted very much to take Ling Han in under his banner as one of his followers to witness the supreme hegemony he would establish when he entered into the celestial realm one day. Because they were both exiles, this kind of acknowledgement would give him more pleasure. The others did not understand, however. How could such a powerful saber strike deliver such a tranquil attack? That is a saber that slices the spirit. It looks incredibly colossal, but actually has no true form. Naturally, it would not cause much of a commotion. A powerful figure spoke up to explain. That was a representative sent from the Star San Martial Arts Academy, an elite of eternal river tier. When these words were said, everyone was stunned. It should be known that even in the immortal realm, most people were basically cultivating the strength of their physical body, and though they would still cultivate their spirit, it was only primarily in the direction of strengthening the latter so that the strength of one's spirit would keep up with one's cultivation level. However, they would not deliberately be cultivating the intensity thereof, which also meant that if they had encountered Gudawi, it was possible that even if 100 of them joined forces, it would still be useless. When the heavens will saber-struck, all of them would become empty shells. Sai, that guy is indeed very extraordinary as well, and he has actually been killed, just like this. There is one less supreme King Tyr. What a real pity. That's not right. If this guy had died, shouldn't the floating rock beneath his feet have been absorbed by Gudawi? Someone suddenly exclaimed. Gask! Everyone's eyes had widened, and they once again focused their eyes on Ling Han. Fuck! Don't you tell them that this guy still hadn't died.